Ready, guys? I'd like to call the work session on Monday, December 16th, 2013, 5 p.m. We only have 2 items on the agenda, and everybody seems to be around the table. So the first agenda item is 3.1, an update regarding focus on success, strategic planning process, and the draft economic development action plan. Sherry Wakefield signs to present. Sherry?
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Is it on? Is it on? Is your presentation on that session? It's not?
They're not on. System's not on.
Yeah.
Now it's on.
Mine.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good.
It's my pleasure to join you this evening to talk about the economic development strategic planning effort that's been going on here at the city over the course of the last year. We were very fortunate, as you recall, to receive a grant from Arizona Public Service Company to work with our consultant, Judy Scalise of ESI Corporation, to go through a full economic development strategic planning effort, and we invited 29 of our partners from the community and from industry to join us during that process. And we think that we've come up with a very aggressive set of action steps, not just a plan to sit on the shelf, but action steps to help us achieve our economic development goals. And I would like to say that we do owe a debt of service to Arizona Public Service because they subsidized about 91% of the cost of this study for us to make this happen, and so we are grateful to their team in our community. That being said, Judy has really done an amazing job. Part of this plan was understanding who we are as a community, and it was very important that we engage the business community in that discussion. So not only will you find many action steps and recommendations, but you'll also find some pretty good data. And I know one of the things that is often confusing, for example, is that we told you the data from the retail study, and then we show you the census data when we do our planning numbers, and now we're going to show you some other data here tonight that is some other data that Judy uses in her studies across the valley and across the country with different communities. So should you have questions or concerns about some of that, let us kind of define for you the difference between the data points that you might hear this evening. So, and with that, I would kick it over to Judy.
Before you start, let me ask, do you mind if council interrupts or asks the questions at the time, or would you prefer to finish?
No, not at all. This is a work session, and if there's some discussion that we can have throughout the process, that would be
All right.
great.
Thank
Is this
you.
one working? Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Is this on? All right. So what I've prepared for you this evening is kind of a high-level summary of the economic development strategic planning process, the analysis that we went through as it relates to looking at existing conditions and going through a SWOT, and then the information that was prepared working with the Technical Advisory Committee and identifying the 5 strategic focus areas or initiatives, and then drilling down to some goals and some strategic action items. And so what I want to do is just walk through the presentation with you today. So today we want to talk about the overview of the planning process, and Sherry mentioned a little bit about what we did, and we did have input from stakeholders, but I'll get into a little bit more about that. Our findings as it relates to our existing conditions and the SWOT analysis, discussion about the vision statement that was created, an economic development vision statement that was created for the plan based on the values that the Technical Advisory Committee felt were very important to the community, and that included input from the stakeholders as well. And finally, the plan summary. And in your packet, besides the PowerPoint presentation, you also have the full economic development goals and strategies, which is the action item, and that's one piece of the overall economic development report. So the planning process includes several pieces to it. We always work with the Technical Advisory Advisory Committee, which is comprised of stakeholders in the community. It typically consists of folks that are involved in economic development from the city level or the economic development organization we're working with. It can include elected officials. It includes key stakeholders in the community, such as some of your major employers, perhaps folks from the real estate community, developers, and so forth, healthcare, education. So we have a good cross-section of the community that comes together to really work with us as we prepare the plan. They are the sounding board. They provide input into the process. They react to preliminary materials that we present to them, and they provide us with some direction. So that's the glue that kind of holds the whole thing together. In addition to that, we conducted interviews, several interviews throughout the community that consisted of not only you folks here, but also representatives from the real estate brokerage community to get an understanding from their perspective about the market and how it compares to other areas of the metropolitan Phoenix area, and also to help us identify who your competitors were in the local market. We also met with some of your major employers from the aerospace, healthcare, and education community, because we're interested in those folks as major economic drivers here in the community. So we interviewed those stakeholders as well and asked a series of questions as it related to what their vision was of the area, what they felt was working, where they thought some deficiencies existed that needed to be overcome. Our existing conditions evaluation starts with looking at the economy of the area. So we prepare an economic base. This is where you are today, and it's important to understand, although these are trailing indicators, as they always are because data always lags, it's a benchmark to help you understand where you are from the standpoint of your growth, your employment, your median household income, your educational attainment levels, all of those things that are critical to any business that might be evaluating your community. And then lastly, a part of the existing conditions, we do what's called a SWOT analysis. It's a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And many of you addressed some of the questions that I had asked of you. And this information was compiled based on the stakeholder interviews, as well as the independent research and the work that we did reviewing some existing studies and plans that the community had, and then again input from some of the key stakeholders. And that SWOT analysis, helps drive the economic development plan. It helps us identify what you felt were the key opportunities that you should be leveraging as you go forward with your planning process, and what some of the deficiencies are that you have to work on. And so all of that rolls into the economic development strategic plan. The strategic plan is anchored by a vision. It becomes the touchstone of the plan. It's important for your goals and objectives to essentially be able to achieve the vision that you've stated. So the vision is, kind of the anchor to the whole planning process. Then we've identified 5 key initiative areas to focus on, and then each initiative has either one or several goals under that, and then within the goals there are strategy or implementation items. And then lastly, as a part of the plan, we have benchmarks, and this is a way to measure progress over time. It's really important to come back on a regular basis, at least annually, and go back and evaluate where you were, and once the plan has been implemented, look to see where you are. And in some cases, a metric might not change, and that could be good. In other cases, things have improved, and you can see that those improvements are made based on an increase in a certain metric. So that's the planning process that we go through for any economic development plan that we prepare. So now I just want to focus on some of the findings as it relates to the existing conditions and SWOT analysis. And so as we evaluated Goodyear, clearly the city of Goodyear has grown exponentially greater than the county and the state as a whole. And you can see that over the time horizon from 1990 to 2010. And so, that's a positive sign. You're a community that's growing. Unlike other communities in the country, some are losing population, which is not a good place to be in. So your challenge is the opposite. You've got growth. You've got population growth. In addition to that, you've got labor force participation increase. You can see here, I've got my laser pointer. For those of you that can see the screen, you can see here where blue is the population growth relative to the labor force participation rate over a time horizon from 2000 to 2010. This is Arizona, this is Maricopa County, and this is Goodyear. And so in addition to achieving this tremendous population growth, your labor force participation rate has been keeping up as well. And that's important that you know that folks that are living in Goodyear are working somewhere, maybe in Goodyear, but most likely somewhere else. And so those folks are contributors to the economy. And so that's important from a standpoint of, fiscal sustainability for the community, because those folks spend money. So as we identify the population that lives in the community, you can see that this is a typical diagram that you start to look at for your age cohorts. On the left are the males and on the right are the females. What's interesting to note is that the age cohort from 15 to about 34, there are quite a few, there are about 3 percentage points less males than there are females. And that's just an interesting thing to point out. It doesn't happen with the other cohorts, other demographic cohorts, as it does with the females and the males at that age cohort. So educational attainment, I've circled a few items on the PowerPoint presentation. Certainly you score well when it comes to high school graduates, compared to the county. Some college and no degree, you also rank higher than the county as a whole. The area where Goodyear lags a little bit is in higher education for bachelor's degree and graduates with a professional degree. A little bit behind the county as a whole. As you probably are aware, the county is behind the country as a whole. So that's probably a trend that just falls through, the rest of the state. Median household income, and I think this is probably one of the metrics that Sherry was talking about. This is based on 2010 census data. And this is the data that we used back when we compiled this information in May.
At the moment, because, boy, that is certainly changed from what we've been giving out.
So, Mayor, I think it's
what happened in the meantime, because, I've been saying, more educated, and Goodyear, and this doesn't say that, of course.
Right. So the educational attainment slide is really about overall college attainment, is what we typically have talked about, so that they have some college. We actually are ahead of the county if you combine the categories.
So what we were using before, because stats are so important to us, because they get passed around immediately. So what we were giving then was a combination of some college, associate degree and bachelor degree into one and that's how it added up.
That's correct. And again, that's a tool that we use for marketing the community, and so
we do continue to use that. So you would say a different percentage. If you were out marketing, what would you say?
Right. I would say 31% of our residents have some college or higher education.
That's not what we were using, though. We were using up into the 80s and 90s at one point. So I'm glad to see this cleared up, and we need to look back on information that we've given out. So
Mayor,
yeah, Joe.
Hello.
Yeah, I think it's more important to focus in on those last two, because I would think most of your employers are looking at those last two categories other than some or the other. So yeah, I think it's important that we clarify that.
And I think that came from some of our surveys that we did at the city level.
That's correct. Those were self-reported numbers on our citizen survey, which always have some level of error or, shall we say, margin of error.
That's one thing I don't want to happen, because it just puts us all in a terrible position. Go ahead.
I just wanted to know, because you did say we are lower than, obviously, the national average here. What is the national average? Because I've heard different figures, too. So we're all on the same plane, I guess.
I'm just going to take a rough guess. I don't know the exact number. It is in the 20s, and I would say it's probably about 23%.
For which one? For
a bachelor's degree or higher.
Okay.
Yeah. And so Arizona lags behind the nation. Maricopa County lags behind the nation as well. And certainly Goodyear, is a little bit behind the county as a whole.
And then on the median household income, we have from the retail study said our average household income is about $76,000, which is a correct number, average being different than median.
Yeah, there's different metrics that you look at for income. There's mean, there's median, there's household income, there's family income, there's per capita income. So it depends on what you're trying to promote and which figure that you would use to put your best foot forward.
So you figure out what you're going to promote, and then you figure out what the average is. Gotcha.
So the unemployment trends are from 2000 to 2012. for the full year. And as you can see, there's you're trending downwards, which is good. Unemployment is lower than it was at the peak at about 2009, 2010. Goodyear has done better than the state, but perhaps not as great as the county. And this is a slide that shows the occupational mix of the residents that live in Goodyear compared to Maricopa County in the state of Arizona. As you can see, blue represents Goodyear, and you've got a higher concentration of management, business, science, and art occupations compared to the county and the state. Also exceed a little bit more in production, transportation, and material moving occupations. So this just shows you a comparison in terms of where you are from an occupational standpoint. The next slide looks at employment by industry, and these are the industries that are physically present within the city of Goodyear. And you have a lot in educational services and healthcare, much more so than the county or the state as a whole. And you also exceed in transportation, warehousing, and utilities.
Judy, it seems to me that from a standard deviation or whatever, we're in the ballpark of all of them. I don't see anything that jumps out there, not by 1%.
Agreed. And I think, Councilman Pizzillo, I think it's important to note, for example, one opportunity that we have identified in our market is the lack of, and I know I'm going to chuck a little ahead here, Judy, but is the lack of existing office buildings, for example, for us to recruit industry to. And so this data becomes helpful in the discussion because much of the office that occurs in Metro Phoenix is in that financial insurance real estate area and in the administrative management area as well. And so demonstrating now this is the employment opportunities in the community. So as we build our office space, we would hope to see those numbers increase and the transportation numbers perhaps stay steady.
Yeah, later on we have a slide that shows the out-commuting of the residents that live here. This slide looks at the county as a whole, or I'm sorry, the Phoenix MSA in terms of its concentration of industry and growth of industry. And so there's a lot going on in this chart. So just to explain it very quickly, the size of the bubble represents the magnitude of jobs associated with that industry. So the two large bubbles include transportation, trade, utilities, education, health services, and business and professional services. The 1.0 is what we call a location quotient. And when you run a location quotient on a community, you try to identify the critical mass of that industry in the local market compared to whatever region you're comparing it to. In this case, we compared Maricopa County to the state of Arizona as a whole. And so anything with the 1.0 or greater means that there's a higher concentration of that industry represented in the market than the benchmark that we're looking at, in this case, Arizona. And so the vertical axis is 0. And so anything to the right of the vertical axis essentially shows that that industry is growing. Anything to the left of the vertical axis shows that that industry is shrinking in size. And so it's important to understand that this is just a point in time, and over time these bubbles move around, but it's just helpful to understand what the concentration of the industry mix is within the marketplace, because when you start your own recruitment program and you start identifying the industries that make sense for this market, you really look to the county to see what the concentration of those industries are and what you could possibly leverage to attract that here. Because if you have high concentrations of healthcare here, you're probably going to be able to attract and grow higher concentrations of healthcare. Same with aerospace. Aerospace is a company that is attracted to an area based on the business climate, based on the availability of the labor. And so if there's a high concentration of aerospace in a particular market, that's a signal to other aerospace companies that there's probably, you're profitable there, and it's probably a good place in which to do business. And so it's interesting to see this, to understand where things are going. I always like to look at manufacturing because, manufacturing has, over the decades, has shrunk in size in terms of employment. Although their gross domestic product has increased over the years, their employment has decreased. And the reason being is because manufacturing has become more automated. They've taken technology and they've innovated in their manufacturing processes. And as a result, they don't have to have as many jobs. However, the jobs that they do have are typically very well-paying positions.
This 1.0 quotient concept is something that you'll also see in our general plan discussion moving forward. So we talked about densities in our general plan, quite extensively, and we talked about job creation corridors and how those all intermix from a land use perspective. You'll also see this 1.0 quotient discussed in that environment. So it is in the context of jobs per population. And so Goodyear lags that 1.0 quotient to about the tune of 0.79. And so we have an opportunity then to grow our jobs to our population over time, and they somewhat correlate to what's happening by industry as well. So we have an opportunity to grow the employment base in the community.
The next slide shows worker flow, and this is data from the U.S. Census Bureau, and it's based on 2002 to 2011. I'm not sure entirely of the methodology that they use, but they don't look at one point in time. They take the data over several years, and it's what they call their LEHD, Origin Destination Employment Statistics. And so what you see here, which is very interesting for Goodyear, is that you've got 26,450 people that live in Goodyear, of which 92.8% of those folks are working elsewhere. So they live in Goodyear and they're working elsewhere. Of that, about 1,932 are literally living and working in the city of Goodyear. On the alternative, there are about 13,689 people that are employed in Goodyear, and it represents about 85.9% that are employed in Goodyear but live somewhere else. So these are folks that are in commuting to the city every day. And so when you start to break down the data, it's interesting to understand where your Goodyear residents go to work. And clearly nearly 49% of them are working in the city of Phoenix. 6.3% are going to Tempe, 5.3% to Avondale, and 4.8% to Glendale, and so forth. So you can kind of see where your folks are out commuting. And that's no surprise to anybody that's on the freeway driving to work in the morning, because you're right there with the rest of your colleagues, going to work.
So if there was any doubt in our minds that we might need an economic development program to create jobs in the community that more closely match those occupations of our residents, these are the numbers that help us get to that conclusion.
Mm-hmm. And then also of interest are the jobs by industry sector, and I aggregated this information to make this a more simple table. And so in commuters, 20% of your in commuters are working in kind of the industrial sector, embodied by manufacturing, wholesale trade, and distribution, where your outcommuters are about 16.4% outcommute to those types of industries. Then you look at outcommuters are mostly, as Sherry mentioned, in the office sector. 21.5% of the people that live in Goodyear are outcommuting to work in an office-type environment. And so it's just interesting to see in-commute versus out-commute. You've got a high concentration of people within arts and entertainment that are in-commuting compared to your out-commuters. And those typically are not as higher paid positions. And so oftentimes people spend money where they live and work. And so if you have folks that are coming in that are working in lower paid jobs, the amount of money that they're going to spend in the community won't be as significant as it would be if it were people that lived and worked here that were working in those higher paid positions.
Another point on this slide that I think is important is the healthcare statistic. So while we have a very robust and growing healthcare environment, we have 12% of our workforce that we could still be capturing in market for these healthcare employers. So that's quite a significant incentive to healthcare to expand in the community.
So that pretty much concludes the economic base analysis. Now I want to talk a little bit about the SWOT. And really what the SWOT does is examines the foundations that support and sustain economic development within a community. You look at a variety of things. You look at the transportation systems. You look at the labor force availability. You look at the business climate, the regulatory climate. You look at a number of things, the infrastructure that the community has in place in order to support business and industry. So our high-level findings, these are some of the key SWOT findings. The full report has the large SWOT table, but I thought these were the most interesting ones and which carried forward as it related to the economic development goals and objectives. So clearly, one of your key strengths is the quality of life. Literally, everyone that we spoke to, whether they lived in Goodyear or were a stakeholder that did business in Goodyear, basically said Goodyear has a very high quality of life. And these are folks that work in other market areas, and so they've got something from which to compare to. And so quality of life is clearly one of the strengths that you have going going forward. Your proximity to transportation systems. Interstate 10 is a major, network for moving the goods and people to market. And so your proximity to Interstate 10 is really tremendous. You've got the Phoenix Goodyear Airport, which, in our estimation was an underutilized asset in the community. You've got proximity to Southern California. Time and time again, everyone talks about your proximity to Southern California because that is a big market that industry that's in Arizona sells to in California or buys supplies from industries in California. You've got an educated workforce, and you've got your local and elected official leadership, which is committed to economic development in Goodyear. And so those are all key strengths that you've got working for you. Some of the weaknesses that were identified, the first and foremost one was the image of the West Valley. That continued to come up. That was a theme that we heard over and over again. You also have a shortage of pad-ready sites and spec buildings. And when you talk about economic development and speed to market, and when a company wants to get in a building because they want to ramp up immediately, if you don't have that building in place today and another community does, you're going to lose that game every day. So it's important to understand that having shovel-ready sites and existing space for companies to move into is one of the key things that communities across the country are able to win deals over and over again because they've got the inventory of what's needed. Another weakness was insufficient and expensive office space. It was interesting to me to talk to some of the office brokers. I was absolutely amazed that your office lease rates are higher than the average office lease rates in Phoenix. And so that's a big disincentive for companies that would like to set up shop and be in Goodyear as it relates to, in office uses. Well, I was told that the cost to put in the building, the tenant improvements are higher. Therefore, they've got to capitalize on their investment, and so that translates into higher rents.
There's another component to that, Councilmember Pizzilla, which is really interesting. It's the supply and demand factor, which shouldn't be all that surprising, but because we have such a low square footage of office in Goodyear in general, they're able to charge and high quality space. And that dynamic exists also, interestingly, in the multifamily market. So the multifamily consultants have told us that most of the inventory in Goodyear is Class A apartment type living, apartment home community type living. And so our rents are, considerably 20 to 30% higher than average on market for the same type of product because it's newer and we have a limited supply.
Yeah, another weakness, you've got that workforce that's out commuting every day. And then lastly, an indistinguishable downtown or city center. That was pointed out is there's not a there within the city of Goodyear. Whereas other communities have that there, and it's just it seems to embody the spirit of the community. There's someplace everybody can point to. This is our downtown. So that was one of the weaknesses that was identified. Key opportunities. Certainly, the Phoenix Goodyear Airport is a key opportunity, and having a partner with the city of Phoenix and working in tandem with you all is an important first step to leverage that airport, attract more users and other airport operations that are compatible to the land uses in the surrounding area. Leveraging the military reuse zone. That's, not every community in Arizona has that. You do. And so being able to leverage that to attract business and industry is really important. You've got the opportunity along Bullard Road corridor. That's a blank slate that you've got to work with. Certainly it's going to be longer term because you've got other areas of the city that's already more of a built environment. You've got activity taking place. But there's a key opportunity going forward with the Bullard Road corridor. Your existing healthcare assets should not be underestimated in terms of what you have here. Leveraging those healthcare assets and attracting more healthcare is certainly one of the strategies in the economic development plan. It is the sector of the economy that in the downturn continue to grow. Education and healthcare were the two sectors that, in spite of all of the downturn everywhere else, continue to create jobs in the marketplace. Another a key opportunity is the Estrella Falls Mall. And when that mall opens up, the ancillary development that will take place in and around that mall. Those are key. Everybody's smiling, I know, because we've been waiting for that mall for so long now. We better get an invitation at the ground opening. And then lastly, what we're calling the creation of a medical district. This is this is a concept that communities across the country are focusing on. They're becoming more strategic in their economic development approach. They're identifying areas within their community where those key assets are and really trying to build upon those assets. Because you've got some key healthcare assets here that are in the process of growing and good things could happen, there's the opportunity to create, and I've renamed it from medical district to an innovation corridor, and really leveraging those assets and attracting more of those types of assets in the area. And so communities are becoming smarter in terms of how they brand and market themselves, and identifying an area within the city and saying this is going to be our innovation corridor is very forward thinking for a community to do, and you've got something to work with. It's not like a blank slate where you've nothing there. You do have assets that you can leverage and continue to work with. And those two healthcare providers, I think, are key partners. They've been at the table. They're interested in what's going on in the city, and they certainly want to help attract more here. Some of the threats that your community is facing is certainly the perception that you're just warehousing distribution. There are real estate brokers that are focused on warehousing distribution that absolutely love Goodyear, and that's great. And we certainly want all the low-hanging fruit that we can get. They are an extension of your marketing outreach. They do a great job in marketing Goodyear, but you're more than that. And so you don't want to be pigeonholed just as a warehouse distribution center, because you've got more to offer. There's intense competition, not just locally, but regionally and nationally for business development. There's economic development organizations in just about every city throughout the United States, and multiple layers of economic development groups, county, regional, and so forth. So, understanding where the competition is and what they're doing versus what you're doing is just being smart about your understanding your competition. That's true with any company that's marketing their product, is to understand who their competition is and what they're doing. Another potential threat is the potential lack of water and sewer capacity within the systems. And then lastly, reacting to growth and not planning for it. That's always when you're a high growth, rapid growth city, that's also, that can also be a threat, is that it can get ahead of you before the infrastructure can keep up. So these are some of the competitor cities, and based on the product type, it's a different city. So we looked at it from the standpoint of warehousing, distribution, manufacturing versus office. And from a local market standpoint, for warehousing distribution, your competitors, according to the real estate brokerage community, are Avondale, Glendale, Tolleson, the Southwest Phoenix area, and Pinal County. Nationally, when a company is looking at warehousing distribution, and if you're in the mix with other communities around the country, Reno Sparks, the Inland Empire, Salt Lake City were identified as your competitors. Moving on to manufacturing, the local market essentially is the same as it is for warehousing distribution. Nationally, from a manufacturing standpoint, Henderson pops up in there, as well as Texas. Texas is always a big player, no matter what they're doing, no matter who's competing with them. They're always at the table, and they've got pretty big guns. And then lastly, under office, you're competing for office space users with Glendale and Loop 101. And office is a local market. You're not competing nationally when it comes to office space users. So moving on into the economic development plan. So the plan it spans over 5 years. It's a 5-year time horizon. It's anchored by an economic development vision. It's designed around those key 5 initiatives that I had mentioned earlier, and those 5 initiatives include business development. Every economic development plan has a business development component to it, meaning we're trying to create and attract jobs to our city. There's another initiative is workforce, because that's part and parcel. What every industry needs is a skilled and ready to work workforce. Employment centers. We have the city of Goodyear has identified several employment centers within the community, and then marketing and branding, and then lastly advocacy. And then the final piece of this whole economic development plan is really being strategic in how you focus your business recruitment efforts, and identifying industry clusters and really focusing on those industry clusters. And so that's kind of the overall
I have a question
framework.
because this was discussed at an event I was this week, and about branding. And really, the result of the discussion that I was in said really the branding happens to follow the marketing. So it's whatever, like if you say our trend is health, then really that's where our brand will go. So it's not like sitting in a room now and thinking, okay, how are we going to brand our city? You have to brand it upon what you have and what you seem to be increasing in your clusters. Is that correct?
Spot on, Mayor. That's exactly it. And so it's no longer, Goodyear, a good city to be in, or, something catchy slogan that we think we can go out and, out Coca-Cola.
Like the rubber tire.
Right. Yeah. That's not really where it is today. It's about your messaging, your branding, matching your assets. And so whether it's geography, an innovation corridor, or it's a cluster, healthcare innovation corridor, that's really where you want your messaging to be. And I'll be honest with you, we have a bit of an opportunity here. Right. So most people probably know Metro Phoenix, top 5, market in the country. Most people might know, some communities along the 101 corridor that we're all familiar with and shall not be named. But beyond that, if we were to do kind of a branding analysis, I don't think many could name more Metro Phoenix communities than a few of those. And so how then do we differentiate ourselves in the selection process with our messaging is really the branding challenge.
Thank you.
So here are our industry cluster targets: aviation and aerospace, higher education, health services, advanced manufacturing, information technology, and tourism. Those were the 6 industry clusters that were identified not only through the interviews, but through discussions with the Technical Advisory Committee. So these were the 6. You'll notice warehousing distribution is not on there. It's going to come your way because of your proximity to California, because your proximity to Interstate 10, because of the Loop 303. You don't have to do a whole lot. No elbow grease there. It's coming to you. But these are the areas, these are the industry clusters that, you have to put a little bit of effort behind. Identify what your assets are within these clusters, prepare your marketing materials as it relates to each one of these clusters so that you're ready to answer those key questions.
Are these in any particular order?
They are not in any particular order. It's not like we're saying that year one you only focus on aviation, aerospace. I mean, you kind of have to be nimble with the market because the market, goes up and down in certain sectors. Sometimes aerospace is not doing well because there's not a whole lot of defense spending, or defense spending is being cut back. And so as a result of that, you may focus something a little bit more in some other area. So it's important to have a portfolio. And this is kind of the portfolio approach to economic development.
Joe?
The first 3 are pretty self-explanatory. Can you kind of do let's see if I can you this work? Can you kind of expand a little bit more on the advanced manufacturing, information technology, and tourism? The reason why I asked that is, what's the difference between manufacturing and advanced? Information technology, are you talking about like Apple? Are you talking about those type? And then do we have the infrastructure in place to do that? And on tourism, could you kind of broaden and explain what
Sure,
you're
Councilman
talking about
Pizzillo. Yeah, advanced manufacturing, it's manufacturing, but what has happened in manufacturing today is the innovation. And so when you're talking about manufacturing a product, it's the technology that is employed in development of that product today. You've got 3D printers. You certainly have had AutoCAD used in manufacturing, CNC programming. You have the ability to make a product by incorporating the latest technology that's available into the process. So it's not so much what's being made, it's how it's being made.
Sub-Zero would get in that classification, wouldn't, with some of their...
Sub-Zero, perfect example of, and another precisely on the line that Judy's talking about would be Scholler Arca Systems here in our own community, right? So a German plastics manufacturing company. They make, the lightest, most durable packing crates in the industry and cost efficient as well. So, they're hitting all the home run there with the product. That's not unlike what happens in the healthcare industry. Tech plastics, there's different types of ways to look at that. But for example, contact lens can be made in many different ways, and much of that is a plastics technology. While the plastics product itself may be composed of different chemicals, the machines that actually form the plastic are really where the magic comes into kind of being that industry leader. And as you might imagine, in terms of manufacturing, as Judy was saying, in former years, it was really about kind of bodies in the machining floor. So just shifts of people when we were making automobiles, large quantities of bodies and muscle and other products and different types of basic materials going into the manufacturing process. Today it's all about advanced materials, so lighter, more durable, stronger. So, for example, if we think of the technology that was employed in the past in ballistics material. So a ballistics vest for a police officer used to weigh close to 40 pounds or so, not more than 20 years ago. Today, a ballistics vest can weigh, ounces, literally, because the material within the vest has changed so dramatically. And so that's the advanced manufacturing piece of it.
Yeah, and as a result of that, manufacturing requires a skilled workforce. So typically the middle skills is what they're looking for. Somebody that's got at least a high school diploma and a little bit, not necessarily a 4-year degree, but some advanced training, because those folks need to run these sophisticated pieces of equipment. And so they have to have
That's your
greater
community
education.
colleges and your West Mex.
Exactly. Yeah.
The IT component of it is really crucial, and I will tell you that it's an opportunity for us because in Arizona we have quite a bit of information technology talent. It's not the traditional Silicon Valley information technology talent. So we have an interesting stratification, and we can drill down on some of these numbers maybe at a later meeting because it's pretty interesting material. Information technology in Arizona tends to be more of the basic IT. So really the guy that's running the server room and maintaining your network and doing all of these things. That's what supports all the financial, insurance, real estate, back office operations, U.S. Airways, Wells Fargo, those sorts of things. But if you were talking about information technology in the Silicon Valley, you might be talking about software development. And we actually have a very low percentage of software development type activity going on in Metro Phoenix. And so it's an opportunity for us working with our community colleges and our 4-year colleges and our engineering programs to grow information technology talent in the market that can support a more mature information technology infrastructure and industry going forward. So tourism is one of those industries in economic development that is a little bit like retail, right? So tourism and retail often get thrown into this other bubble. And it tends to be a bigger focus for maturing communities. So as we've grown, from 8,000 residents to 71,000 residents over the last 10-year period, we still have a very strong need to develop tourism and retail in our community, not only for our tax base, but also to provide jobs at every level of our economic income. And so tourism for us is probably the most untapped market in terms of the natural assets that we have in Goodyear and in the West Valley to attract that tourism dollar to the community. And so one aspect of that is that it came up during the general plan as well. Several general plan members asked us at what point does a community do tourism on their own? In other words, when can we brand Goodyear as Goodyear versus, the West Valley or part of Metro Phoenix? And we may be closer to that tipping point at 70,000 residents, but my guess is it's going to make a little more sense to us at 100,000 or 125,000. So as we partner with the Southwest Valley Chamber to do our tourism advocacy today, we may want to be looking at some of that on our own as we develop assets in the community. More resorts, more than just a business class hotel environment, more of a tourism destination class hotel environment, and more of our natural assets that we have here in the community.
Joanne?
On the information technology, 2 questions. So first of all, you're not speaking of just data centers, correct? But with software development opportunities, things like that of that nature, will this be a more difficult area for us to meet because of our lack of infrastructure? Or are we somewhere in between for that type of industry?
Well, based on the analysis that we did, we think that you do have the infrastructure is in the ground, the fiber's there, which is important to information technology, and the labor force is in the area. So what you may be lacking is existing space to accommodate that type of use. And also what you might be lacking is kind of that ambiance that IT workers are looking for. So there's plenty of opportunity in this field. It's growing. It's an industry that continues to evolve. And Sherry said that software development is not a big component of our IT. It's growing, though. I have to say that we have more software development companies that have moved here and are starting up here than we have ever had in the past. ASU is doing their best to graduate students with software engineering degrees, but there is a lack in higher education for training in software engineering. We don't have a master's. Beyond ASU, there are not other colleges that are providing master programs in those areas.
Gotcha. Well, I just recall David Ramirez giving us a kind of a lowdown of where some of that infrastructure needed to be put in place to connect us all within
There are a few areas.
Right, there was a few areas, and so that's why I was asking that question. But speaking with a friend the other day that's in the energy business, he was talking about he's just waiting for the West Valley to expand because of the substations that are in place and the large amounts of infrastructure for just energy consumptions here, and so that's why I was curious. But it's more the fiber optic, I think, type of things to connect.
Councilmember, excellent point. And in fact, one of the strategies that we've kicked off in our economic development team over the last 3 or 4 months was actually investigating what our infrastructure is. And as we all know, after 9/11, much of that information is not, publicly shareable for good reason. But what we found, and surprising even to us, is that we have a very robust fiber infrastructure from the private investment side in quite a bit of our business corridors throughout the community. And more importantly, I think where we have existing industry, we actually have fiber support. A good bit of that was done through the activity at Luke Air Force Base and brought into our community for aerospace investment. But it's really quite robust, and in fact, we have actively worked with the real estate community to share that infrastructure and talk to them about projects that might be appropriate in the community, and are shortlisted for a couple really awesome projects. So, just sometimes digging, as we've done with this project here, our strategic planning effort, provides some interesting opportunity. The fiber that was referred to in previous presentations was our public investment of fiber, where we have gone in and put in, as they call it, dark fiber in trenches when we're there. And that's always a good strategy. It certainly can provide benefit in the long run, but we were surprised to learn about the private investment.
Sherry?
Yes. Excuse me. I have a question about tourism. There's a lot of major events in the West Valley, and Glendale just got the championship game for 2015, and we've got the Super Bowl and even NASCAR. I sometimes don't know how this works into the strategic plan that you're working on for this. How do we make ourselves relevant to that rather than just the place to drive through? How do we attract those dollars to our city?
So I'll take a little bit of a run at that. Part of the issue that we have on the hospitality side is that prior to the recession anyway, we had a very high average occupancy rate and a relatively high per room night cost. So, and we had, to this point, we had one operator operating our 5 major hospitality assets, and so they were able to capture the market. And so one thing that I'm fairly certain of is that we didn't have a lot of opportunity for room nights. We didn't have capacity in our existing assets to entertain room stays during these events, and certainly during the peak months when many of these events occur, we were full. And so I would now, let's put this in context, right? The lagging indicator of every market is the hospitality component. So that's the last one that will kick off in terms of investment. And so it's going to be a bit of a challenge, but we have talked to our local developer about doing additional projects, and we've talked to other major brands about bringing products into the market. And we think that the mall certainly will be one thing that will kick that off probably faster than any. So I think your comment is right on, but having opportunity, not unlike our spec building and lack of existing buildings in the market, is very similar in hospitality.
But during the downturn, because we had really a couple of hotels that were going right off of I-10 that we're going to build, and so they just pulled back. And the perplexing part is that when when the West Valley got the Super Bowl, you heard all these people were, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and it's very hard for us to do. We can't build a hotel, we can't build some of these entertainment, but so the people that are in the investors and the developers sat and did not think that's a good enough opportunity to make a move. So it's rather frustrating on the city's part.
It is, Mayor, and it's not to say that, for example, Glendale wasn't proactive in creating their opportunity at Westgate with hospitality, and it's not to say that this, community wouldn't be interested in participating in some public-private partnership or mixed-use type project in the long run that would benefit the community, a convention center or conference center project of some sort. But today, what the experts in the industry are telling us is it's a little premature in terms of the need and the demand for rooms.
I think that certainly something that's been indicated through the chamber and through the different studies that have taken place is that, and you hit upon it, our natural resources out here are truly something that people do come to do, and it is a lot of, it's the friends and family type of tourists that's here. Besides the medical tourism that we have here, we do have those opportunities, and then of course we have the sports. But I think on a year-round basis, it's definitely back on our natural resources that we do have. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Joe?
Just to back up just for a second, when you were talking about branding, okay? What typically, when you're looking at a concept for your strategic plan on branding, is you've got 6 items on this target. Obviously, to me, it would seem 6 is too many if you're trying to brand yourself to draw in. How would you go about focusing on a brand as you start to move and market the city?
Were you sitting in our meetings? My goodness, Vice Mayor, you're right on point. We said the same thing, not only from a staff perspective, that we were concerned about spreading, our recruitment efforts too thin, but also that we wanted the brand to be really strong and authentic, which is crucial, right? That you really are that community. And so Judy had the perfect answer for us, and I think she can tell you about how we came to some of the action items at the end that helped us focus that discussion.
Save it until she gets to her point.
Just wanted to make another comment about tourism. It's important to have the rooms here, but it's also important for the people that stay in those rooms to spend their money here. So you have to have other things for them to do. And so one of the strategies, exactly, and one of the strategies is to essentially put together what I call an asset inventory of your tourism attractions, whether it's natural resources, whether it's other destinations like the ballpark, and being able to identify what those are and start packaging those in a way so that people that do come and stay at one of the hotels knows that there's things to do within the city of Goodyear so that they're spending their money here. It's not enough just to have them sleeping in your community. You want them also to be out and about and spending their dollars here. So that's a good part of tourism.
Bill?
Judy, is that where the restaurants entertainment piece falls in?
Absolutely. When you think about when you travel and you go to a community and you're a tourist, what do you do when you get there? You look around and say, are there any museums? Are there, if I'm an outdoor person, are there places for me to hike or mountain bike? So you start to identify what those assets are that you're interested in. And so it's important for the community to think like that. What do we have that somebody would be interested in doing?
Let me take that to an everyday scenario, which is there's no place to go and do anything today. I live in the city, and if I want to do something, I have to leave. So is that tourism when we talk about a target, or is that it's going to come anyway, so we're not going to put it on the list?
No, I think there's several things that a community can do to make their community attractive from a tourism standpoint. Again, going back to your quality of life, which is extremely high. You've made investments in key assets here in the community. And as you continue to identify what those are, not only will the residents that live here benefit from those investments, but other people that would like to come to the city and spend a little time here can benefit from those as well. I don't know what the exact magic bullet is. Sometimes it's just building a critical mass that becomes in and of itself spills over into other things. But just knowing that tourism can be an important component. It's a clean industry. People come in, they spend their money, and they leave. And so it's not that it's low-hanging fruit, but it could be in some cases easier. And you have other partners in the marketplace that you can collaborate with to make sure that gets done.
All right. Well, if I can take this away from tourism for a second, I talked to several people that I know who live in Ohio who like to come out for the ball games in the spring, and I ask them, "Hey, where are you staying?" Well, not in Goodyear because there's nothing to do other than going to see the game. So even though we've got a draw, they won't stay here. So I think, to me, tourism seems to be almost way out in front, and we're missing that magnet in the middle. So, when we talk about targets, my concern is, while I appreciate the strategic thinking of let's think 50,000 feet, sometimes the road right in front of us is a barren desert, if I can use this thing. But so, yeah, I don't want us to lose sight of that. At least personally, I don't. I don't know how the rest of the council feels, but.
Council membership, if I might respond, we did have an opportunity with the land around our ballpark to talk to the development community a bit this year, and it was fairly refreshing for me, the conversation, because it was really about those issues. Do we have the critical mass of everyday rooftops to support the entertainment and the restaurants? And the answer seemed to be fairly strongly yes. And I will tell you that our restaurants are doing extremely well, and our retail study proved that to be the case. And so, as Judy indicated, when you go into a market, what do you do? Well, frequently women shop, right? So the retail, the mall itself, will drive a certain amount of tourism and retail nights all by itself. The other component of it is the business traveler. So we do get a very significant number of business travelers in our hotels. I've talked quite a bit with our hospitality group here. And so the challenge then is to convert the retail kind of destination family member hospitality night to a business opportunity, right? Whether it's capturing them in the restaurants or the retail, or better yet, as is often indicated, Councilmember Loretano, from the events opportunity. So they come and they stay and go to PIR and they think, why am I doing business in the Inland Empire when I can be in this beautiful community, 5 hours outside of LA? And so converting that message is really where the opportunity exists, and has been done very well in other Metro Phoenix communities. And this year we started some strategies around spring training and around certainly our Canadian visitors and owners here in the community, and we just need to be able to grow those. And that's a bit of a resource challenge, getting that focus done, I think, well.
And I think, too, Bill, you're right. I mean, Goodyear doesn't have everything that a tourist would want to come and stay just to be in Goodyear, but it's the region. And right now it's that's what we've been working on, looking at the region, but it's also awareness. Sometimes we have all these events and we have these different things and we don't even know they're going on. And so I think part of that packaging, maybe it is to the Ohio people that come, or it's to the people that come to PIR, but it's really about the packaging of what's going on here in the West Valley, because you know what? All they're thinking about right now is, I got to go to East, I got to go to Scottsdale, I got to go to Tempe. They don't realize that there are things here. And so I think that's part of our, strategy as we continue to grow, but it's that packaging of, think of it as the region, because, we're not quite there as Goodyear, but you know what? We have enough we have enough restaurants if they want to eat here. We have enough, there's things here that if we can at least keep them in the West Valley, they're maybe going to stay here more often than completely excluding us, I guess, would be the thing. Kind of back to the Super Bowl situation, that's back to those things.
But honestly, if I'm coming into this region to see a NASCAR race, mm-hmm. and I have the choice to choose between staying in Goodyear or staying at Westgate, I'm going to choose Westgate.
Sure.
Because right out my door is a place for me to go, hang out, have dinner. They're different. They're not the typical chain restaurant, even though a lot of them are chain. They're not the typical chain. So Again, I'm concerned that we're spending so much time looking at the sky that we're going to fall into the hole in front of us because we're not looking down. And I'm looking for some assurance that this isn't all strategic, that there's something in front that's we can do tourism. And you're right, there's a lot in our region, but there's also a lot that's not here. on the west side. So I want to make sure that we've got a place that people want to come, and then they want to stay. They want to come to PIR, and they go, you know what? I can stay at one of the number of Goodyear hotels, and then I can stay here and do stuff. I don't have to drive 50 miles or 25 miles to go bowling or go do something. You know, I don't know what NASCAR fans do, but
There's no bowling.
A lot of them are staying right there.
well, yeah, exactly. 100,000 of them are staying right on campus, but yeah.
They are.
So I guess that's my only thing, and I'm going to drop it from here. But tourism is great, and I know what we're talking about when we define tourism. But if that's all we're focusing on, and we're missing this entire thing of making this a community that people want to stay and will do, then we've missed the boat.
Councilman Stiff, if I could just comment very briefly. Part of what we did in the 5-year planning process is that we went through prioritization, and we identified the items that should go forward within the first 2 years, which we call the short-term plan. Tourism fell within the 3 to 5 year plan, and the reason is because there were some fundamental things that needed to be needed our focus first and foremost, but also you needed to develop and build some of that critical mass. And waiting for that Estrella Falls Mall to open, and then being able to leverage that a little bit more, so you have more amenities here for not only tourists but business tourists as well to do. So it's something that we felt that was important for the community, but from a short-term standpoint within the plan, it just did not rank high.
And I think I would follow that point with if it is council's wish that become a higher priority, and we use resources towards that end, the destination entertainment hospitality component. That's certainly why we're here. So I will tell you that I'm not entirely comfortable telling you that we have a tourism expert on our team. That might be something where we need to partner with the community.
Still think we're there. I agree with Bill. I get frustrated. I get really frustrated but I don't think we're there. I think we're trying to build density. We're trying to bring in some quality jobs. We're trying to stop the people from commuting. And if they get a good job, whether you have a movie theater or whatever, they're going to say, I think I want to be close to my commute. So they'll buy a home and stay here. So we're kind of right in the, but I can tell you, if somebody came and wanted to open some kind of entertainment, we would not turn them away, and we would certainly make sure. But as much as we're so anxious, and I am anxious as much as anybody around this table, I just think we have to take this step by step, and when the opportunity comes, do it. I mean, we're not going to say no and turn our head, say, I'm sorry, you're just not on the plan. We're going to keep
Well, but it sounds like they are, but in the middle, right?
That's correct.
I think there's higher priorities. I agree.
So,
yeah.
Yes,
Mayor,
Joe.
Just as a piggyback to what Bill was talking about, I think a lot of it's going to come if there's places for people to go within the community. I hear it all the time. No places for families to go. There's no bowling alleys. There's not a quality movie theater. We got plenty of restaurants. That's fine. But there's things that people like to do other than eat. And to me, that's what will bring the others if we can recruit or at least have businesses here for things for people to do other than nice restaurants.
See, the problem is too, though, it's not just the recruiting. If they don't want to build, they have to here. We don't have any place to occupy them. When a grocery store goes out, it's like for us, oh, whoopee, we can bring something, but we get a church or something else, So we don't have the structures. So they, like bowling alleys, they're going to build. We know that. But a lot of entertainment, they want to go into a. I'm sorry, we're getting off, so you're kind of...
Well, Mayor, I appreciate your comments. And truly, it's not that we haven't looked at a lot of tourism and entertainment destination type opportunities. It's really been the critical mass, that density of population that has been lacking in the conversation, to be honest. So.
I just know I agree with Bill to the extent we had a celebration for the grandkids. Had to go to another city to do it because we didn't have that facility here. So, enough said.
Your comments are heard, and we'll look at what we can do to beef that up.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to our vision, which was based on values. When we first started the planning process, the vision statement was fairly lengthy, and I was basically tasked with narrowing it down to 20 words. But at the same time, identifying values that are important for the community to have. And so these values are is a summation of that. In the full plan, there's a greater discussion. And so I was successful in getting the vision statement down to 25 words. So I felt I scored on that one. But at any rate, the values that are fundamental to our vision essentially is, number one, that Goodyear has a healthy and beautiful environment and satisfying quality of life, that people have great jobs and earn a competitive and sustainable income, that businesses prosper within the city of Goodyear, and finally, that partnerships and collaboration embrace a shared economic agenda. So the vision statement then is essentially is that Goodyear is rich with talent and has a vibrant and diverse economy, flourishing with world-class companies and supported by a high quality of life. So it was something that everyone wanted it to be very brief, but they wanted the greater discussion to be held within the values that the community holds dear to economic development. So the economic development plan, when you think about the plan, we talk about it in terms of what our overall objectives are and what we're trying to do with our economic development plan. And so we want to definitely generate robust job growth. Every economic development plan is all about job creation and job retention. And so generating job growth within those industry clusters so that you can maximize your assets that the community has here. You want to invest in infrastructure and other capital projects to stimulate private sector investment within those employment centers that were identified. And then thirdly, create a unique brand for Goodyear that differentiates the city from its competitors and conduct a robust marketing campaign. And I think as you go forward, one of the things that we talked about over and over was that branding. And I think we kind of put branding to the side until we can do a little bit more marketing and really start having some successes in some of these key industry clusters. And probably what will come out of that is branding will become more natural in terms of what makes the most sense. So now what I'd like to do is just walk through some of those, talk about the plan structure, which again was the goals, strategies under those goals, performance measures, and then we've got a short-term plan and then a long-term plan. And what I want to do is just walk through the goals and objectives for you this evening. So those initiatives, the first one was business development, and there were 3 goals associated with business development. Under these goals are strategies, and I believe that also in your packet was the full goals and strategies itself. But I thought for the purposes of this evening, we'd keep it high level. But the first goal is to foster the creation of jobs within the city of Goodyear. The second goal is to promote the growth of industry clusters within Goodyear. And then thirdly, explore the potential of developing a tourism program. And so as we started to go through our prioritization, some of these goals became short-term goals, and some of them became longer-term goals. And the tourism program was one of the longer-term goals. The second focus area is workforce, and under workforce there were 2 goals associated with that. The first one was to ensure a vibrant and prepared workforce within those targeted industry clusters, and the second goal under workforce was to stem the flow of that intellectual brain drain. And this focuses on a couple of things: the outcommuters that you have, and the potential of the millennial generation that is growing up in your community that will say, exactly what Councilman Stipp says. There's nothing to do here. I'm going to get my college degree, but I'm not going to stay in Goodyear. I'm going to leave. And so there's that potential of intellectual brain drain that takes place as well. Looks like these are out of order, huh? The third initiative is what we call employment centers. And the reason for identifying employment centers is because it's important for a community to think strategically about their community and the investments in infrastructure that are necessary in order to advance an economic development agenda. As opposed to just scattering everything around the community, you really focus on where you want the job growth to focus on within your community. So this was an initiative that we identified, and the goal, there are 5 goals under this initiative, and the first one is to develop that innovation corridor centered around healthcare and life sciences. This is a big goal. This is that big vision that the community has to become more than what you currently are today. And so really focusing on identifying the geography of the innovation corridor, identifying the assets that reside within the corridor, looking at the available land and buildings that you could market within the corridor, and working with those partners to identify the type of business that complements the existing healthcare industry that you have here today, and really growing and attracting more healthcare services within your market. Goal 7 is to commence the planning work on the city center development. This ended up becoming a long-term goal for the community. This fell into the years 3 and 5. Goal 8 was to leverage the Phoenix Goodyear Airport area as an economic asset. This was one of the goals that, when we went through the prioritization, that bubbled up to the top. This was one of the most important goals that there were. Goal 9 was to establish Loop 303 as a top advanced manufacturing and logistics employment center. It's starting to happen today. There's a lot of buzz about Loop 303. It's new. It's got some great tenants in that area, and the brokerage community loves the location. So you've got a great partner within the brokerage community to help you market that area. And then the last goal here is to promote other employment centers within the city, and this was a longer term part of the plan as well. The fourth initiative is marketing and branding, and within that was a goal to expand the city's retail base. There are strategies associated with retail attraction, working with Mace Rich as a collaborative partner, identifying what's needed in the area, what can be supported. And so, when you think about what Councilman Pizzillo said, I had to have our granddaughter's event outside of Goodyear because there wasn't a facility that could accommodate it or was even available for us to use. Part of that whole retail attraction is to identify those kinds of uses and put your marketing package together and go out and attract those kinds of entertainment centers, if you will. Goal 13 is to develop a unique brand for Goodyear, and this became a long-term goal. It was something that's important, but we realized that today might be a little bit premature, and so let's bake on it. Let's have some successes under our belt, and let's really get our legs and figure out where we're going as a community, and then we can do a better job of branding who we are. And then the last goal centers around advocacy, and this has to do with fostering public policy that advances the city's economic development agenda. And so those are the key initiatives and the goals that fall within those key initiatives. Any questions about those?
Joe?
I know we've had this discussion as a council as it regards to entertainment and trying to create those venues that Councilmember Stipp had mentioned too, and Councilmember Osborne had mentioned, places for people to go. Granddaughter, combination bowling alley, combination arcade, combination restaurant, combination variety of sports, things along those lines. Does any of that fit in any of those goals that we identified? Now, you mentioned expanding city's retail base, but
right.
I'm not sure if that's a specific in that more, as more towards the entertainment. We even just recently adopted an ordinance in which encourages some of that entertainment. So how does that fit into...
Talking about a brewery.
Yeah, but I mean, how does that fit into...
For the
for the granddaughters. We start them, yeah.
Well, first things first, right?
I'm still saying Nickelodeon land.
Yes,
That's what we
yes.
need. Yes.
But how does that fit into what we've got here on these? Or does it?
Councilman Pizzillo, it falls under, the marketing and branding. So marketing the city and expanding the city's retail base. Retail is used generically. I mean, we're talking retail, entertainment, arts. I mean, it's the broad picture of what people look for in a community for things to do. So it's not just, shopping and going to Dillard's. It's really looking at some of the other venues that could be destination retail types of activity.
The only reason why I ask
With
is...
the shopping center that could be in that confines.
It could be.
Destination that nobody else has.
The only reason why I ask is if somebody on the outside's reading that, just like myself, when I see retail, I think of shopping and Dillard's and things like that. I don't think in terms of what I was asking about, where arcades and nice movie theaters and, a combination type of thing. I don't know if there needs to be a clarification of that statement. I don't know how the others feel, but to me, that title, and I understand it may encompass more, but to me it seems more restrictive.
Yeah, we can rename it.
Rename it retail and entertainment?
I don't know what the others think.
I think it's appropriate. Vice Mayor, I think there's a really crucial element to the discussion, which is typically if you think about a power center, right, it gets to be in the 300,000 to, when we look at, for example, McDowell and Estrella Parkway, when we get them all complete, we're talking about 2 million square feet of retail. Now you have density and expenditure of dollars that are very attractive to a destination entertainment type venue. That's when you start hitting that critical mass. I'm not saying it has to be 2 million. There's not a magic number, but the retailers talk, and they tend to stratify themselves by dollars spent at a venue. And so it's not unlike the conversation we've had with our major retailer anchors at the mall. If your per square foot sales aren't X, we aren't interested in being part of the game. It's the very similar thing happens with entertainment venues and restaurants, quite honestly. So, for example, they recently announced the Oreganos at the Macerich Mall Power Center. It was no accident. Macerich and the Oreganos team have been talking, for years about future sites. When the per square foot sales at venues in Goodyear reach a certain level on restaurants, all of a sudden Oreganos wants to be part of the game. And so there is a bit of the chicken and egg conversation that goes on in that, but I think we're getting to that tipping point, certainly, not later than fall of 2016, but the planning can be done now and should be part of our strategy.
And I understand that. And again, maybe it's just the labeling of the title, because to me, quality of life involves just, not, work, play, but to enjoy, ones to enjoy their activity, whether it's going to a nice restaurant, going to a place to see, museum, going to a park, riding your bikes, variety of things in there. And I understand retail may be somewhat broader, but I'm hoping we don't lose that sight that, again, I hear it all the time, especially from the younger people. They want a place to go, and enjoy themselves, other than just restaurants. Even though we've got tons of them. I went to the Texas Roadhouse the other day, and it was packed. Waited an hour just to get a seat. So again, our restaurants, from what I've seen and where I've been going, because we do contribute a lot to our restaurants in Goodyear, our family, they seem to be doing very well. But again, having a nice movie theater, having, like I said, I had to go. You might have gone to the same place up north just to be able to put on something for the kids or whatever, because we didn't have that. We don't have that venue. So, and I realize it's people and numbers. So,
Wally?
Well, I'm hopeful that when the mall opens, that when we're ready to move forward, we're going to be able to attract the Dave and Buster's, the Toby Keith line dancing, the dance hall, the bowling alleys, and whatever. And I think while we would love to see all of that now, it's not. We're just a little ahead of ourselves. We can't support all of that. But once the mall comes and we're pushing the Harkins and the wonderful things that are there, I just can't help but believe these other entities are going to take a look at Goodyear and say, we're coming, or we're going to locate. And we have no empty buildings anywhere to put anybody anyplace. So until we can get the developers to do some spec building for us, they've got to want to come out here as bad as we want them. That's the key. If we had empty buildings, I can guarantee you we would have people flocking to us. And then the rents would not be so high. They would be more attractive to those companies that want to come. And we were all smiling about the mall. I'll see it when they dig the first shovel of dirt. I'm positive about that they're coming. I'm just anxious for them to start, and then we can get going. I would hope.
I've got a couple shovels at home that I had from other places we could give them. I've got a Cincinnati Reds, I think, and a Cleveland Indians. How about if I send that over to them?
And there's one in the city hall in the corner, Mayor.
Yeah, well, you can do
Mayor, if I might add two points to the discussion. I think we'll change that element to retail and entertainment.
Okay, great.
And Judy has reminded me that we did retain the services of the retail coach for the year ahead to help us with our retail efforts. So I think I'll ask for an entertainment study and add that as a component of our efforts.
I have a big question, burning question. Okay. All of this costs money. So looking at the budget before that we gave economic development, I'm not sure. In fact, was it you that asked, is there enough money during the budget time? Somebody here did.
I did.
You did, okay. So we've got to get realistic on this, and you have to get realistic what it's going to take on some of these things. We want to move forward, we got to do it. So we got to budget it. So we got to figure it out. So it doesn't happen by us just saying we want, we need, come here, we're great. We got to get something so they can get it off the ground and start it happening. So
And that's
I know our city manager's not here tonight. We're putting you in a terrible position on this. I
Keep
know
writing, Bob.
Just say
Larry's
yes.
here tonight, and I know we can't, make final decisions or anything, but I see that we just have to put the effort with the dollars into this. If the citizens want it, and they're aching for it, then we got to figure out a way how we can at least give it a little bit more backing on it. Bill?
Kind of on that note, I'm going to clarify my statement and probably wrap up the ones from before, even though I'm going to sound like this crabby old, and I don't mean that to be derogatory.
You do, but you're a deep thinker, so we understand that. So.
And today it's really deep. In any event, when I saw number 14 rather, the very first thing that I thought of as I think a former city employee was, oh, this is a way for us to stand in front and say, this is our money right here. Happy to say that identify applicable capital improvement projects doesn't appear until number 5. So yay, high five to you on that. But I think to kind of get to what the mayor was talking about, sometimes when we think about economic development, there's always a dollar sign that comes behind it that, oh, we've got to invest money in improving this street or doing this to this intersection or laying this 3 miles of pipe. I also believe, and I see in here there are 8 items underneath there, and really 7 of them are not necessarily tied to a dollar, that they're tied to activities. And I think that's the other side of the coin, is there are things that we can do, marketing things that we can put in place that aren't costing us millions of dollars up front. And that when we identify this project, whatever it is, then that's what we're going to attach our dollars to. And I think we've kind of collectively have said
Don't
that.
mean helter-skelter.
No, I realize
Not
that.
at all. Yeah.
And I think we've done that during executive sessions when opportunities have come forward. We've looked at that, and so I'm pretty confident, especially looking at this, that, like I said, 7 out of the 8 are not necessarily dollar related. They're more procedural things that we can do to keep ourselves moving, and that was very encouraging. And that was, to kind of piggyback on what the mayor was saying. Yes, at some point it's going to cost us to be attractive to a particular client if that's what we want to go after, but it doesn't always mean money either. So I'm glad to see that in there. So thanks.
Councilmember Stipp, I think my team is probably tired of hearing it, but make the plan, work the plan, stick with the plan, and all of a sudden you've got some real successes to talk about. And that's really what we talk about a lot with our team is, we're here today because this is kind of our best effort with the development community and some of our partners in the community to tell us, we think these are your assets and here's your opportunity. But we want your feedback on what that is and what you see as, where we should be capitalizing and pushing our resources. So,
Joanne has a question, but before you do, Joanne asked that, do we have a list of people know the quality of people that sat on this?
we do. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
But, I mean, do
Oh,
they?
I'm sorry. Share some of that.
You
Okay,
do, but
sure.
Don't tell you
Yeah.
do, but don't tell anybody.
It's my pleasure.
I think the public should know this was really a number of different people and different
think so.
career fields and different levels. And so,
Thank you, Judy. So, Sunbelt Holdings, Bob Bambauer, Macerich, Rob Bassett, who's in the audience this evening, Clay Goodman, Estrella Mountain Community College, Bill Grogan from International Capital Investment, our partners at Cancer Treatment Centers of America Investment Team, Stan Holm, CEO, West Valley Hospital, Joe Husband, Phoenix Goodyear Airport Director, Jan Jewett, Emerald Security Group, Ron Jones, Manager, Sub-Zero, Michelle Lehman, Arizona Public Service Company, Joe Marvin, Prime Solutions Group, Patrick McDermott, Arizona Public Service, Diana Morrow, Copper Hospitality, John Safin, Director, Southwest Valley Chamber, Paul Smiley, Sonoran Technologies, Kevin Sullivan, Arizona Commerce Authority, Brent Upton, Lockheed Martin, Candace Wiest, West Valley National Bank, and certainly the mayor sat on this committee as well.
so
Very impressive.
So it gives you an impressive list of people
Yes.
who are. What's interesting, those people are with people every day of all levels, so they're reaching out. Joanne?
Oh, it wasn't so much a question. It was just, the reality too is that these entertainment venues and these restaurants and this retail, all that we want in our city, I don't want to say it's the chicken and egg issue, but we don't have the old downtown where somebody can say, oh, well, you can go into that building. It is back to the buildings. And so part of that strategy is knowing that we're having to sell them a supply and demand. There's no supply here, but there is the demand. And letting them, but the realization that this costs a lot of money because they're going to have to go build, they're going to have to go through the permitting process, they're going to have to go through all that infrastructure that's going to need to be there. That's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to be the attractiveness of the supply and demand that I'm certainly sure you guys will be able to market, because it is what people want out here. And
it really is. And if I might just comment quickly, I think the most telling statistic I saw in this number was the in-commute, out-commute number.
Yes.
And we did have the good fortune to go down to MAG recently and look at some of their recent studies that they put together. And they have some really detailed data that breaks down those conversations. And it is a bit shocking to note that our existing occupations of residents do not match our existing occupations in the community. In essence, we are giving our residents no option but to leave the community to work every day. And very similar to probably our retail, entertainment, hospitality conversation, we also probably don't have the assets to keep them in the community.
And can you just repeat for the public the discretionary fund, the amount that people have in the area?
Absolutely. So our disposable income,
Disposable.
right? So that's
Discretionary, sorry about
a statistic. No, thank you, Mayor. That we have gotten from our retail study as well is about $61,000 discretionary income. So that is extremely high. It's typically down in the $30,000 to $40,000 range. So not only that statistic, but another very important point of data is the majority of our households are single income earner households. So we have that very high median income on one household income earner. And in essence, what that creates is that supply of workforce that Judy was referring to. Our employers here in Goodyear have told us time in and time out of the last 3 years of the recession even, for every recruitment that they have, after screening, they have 8 to 9 qualified applicants. So untapped, ready to go workforce.
Great, thank you. Yes, Sherry.
I thank you for this. This is really interesting, especially all the data and everything, and thank everyone that obviously was involved in it and all the people you listed there, because it's got a lot of great information. I agree with what Joe said. And when you go back and you look at that area of the entertainment, if we could break it down to different kind of categories, because the young families or people with grandchildren might be looking for one thing, we might be looking for more of an adult or a young people's entertainment, and where the teenagers, so we can kind of go see, as we break it down, and we can see what we have and where we really are lacking. Because I found the same thing. We used to have a couple places like that here, like a Bounce U, and they closed up, and and I know the recession hurt. A lot of these are, sole proprietorships are very independent, a lot of these entertainment venues. So I don't know how we reach out and when the time's right, but yeah, that is definitely something we're lacking. And if you could break it, when you go through it, kind of break it down into like the different areas, because we need a little bit of everything. We need, some arts, and I know Joanne always mentions summer programs. There are no summer programs here. You have to take your kids pretty much to Scottsdale for some of these arts and science center programs, that stuff that are out there. So just when we're looking at those resources, I'd appreciate if you kind of break it down a little. But thank you so much, and thank you very much, Judy.
It's my pleasure, and I appreciate that direction. That will be very helpful, and I'll get with Aaron Farmer this week and talk to him about what that opportunity looks like. Be back with you.
Yes, I'd like to say too, and I know the rest of the council feels like that. Thank you for all your work, and I know the time it took. I was in some of those meetings, and the time that our citizens took and businessmen to take part in that. So it is greatly appreciated. You're hearing a lot of frustration. Everybody. I know they say Rome wasn't built in a day. Well, somehow
it's pent-up demand.
It's pent-up demand, and we came off, before the downturn, we were on such a high because revenue was coming in and houses were being built, and we were on our way. And so this is leftover frustration here tonight. So, but we do appreciate, and we know we need a structure. all right, because you can hear from this table that right now we're all kind of, ranting about certain areas, and you can't get to all these areas without having a core, and I appreciate what you've done. So thank you very much.
Okay, moving on, we're almost done. So our next steps essentially is to finalize the plan, obtain feedback on the full report from staff. Besides the action items that you saw in front of you, there's a full report that includes a summary of the economic base analysis, the SWOT analysis. It's got information about what those key opportunities are, a discussion about that. So there's a bigger report that entails the economic development plan. So we're waiting to get feedback on that, and then we'll finalize that. So, and I know we've had discussion, but we certainly can have more discussion.
Is there anything left? Anybody else? Any more comments?
Go forth and prosper.
Yeah.
Yeah, go forth and prosper.
Thank you once again.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Judy.
Larry, we set the stage for you.
The next item is an update on the infrastructure improvement plan and land use assumptions. Larry Lang, Finance Director, will present.
Tracy, are you coming? She's got the binder.
Oh, she's got
Let me know. I just got a briefcase here, so actually I would appreciate Tracy
It was, yeah.
being up with me just
Gosh.
if for no other reason to keep me on track a little bit. It's actually a very interesting discussion right after the discussion we just had. Economic development ties into the development impact fees and so forth. And before I start, as I was listening, there is one thing, and my staff hears this all the time, and actually a lot of city staff hear this all the time. We're going to be talking about development impact fees. And most people, as they look at that, the natural reaction is that's a revenue source for the city. And technically and legally, it's a revenue source. But what I say constantly and remind our staff is that because of the obligations it creates, it's a liability. It is a good funding source for infrastructure, but and some of the discussions we're going to go through this evening are going to be about things that we need to think about as we move forward. And so I think it just kind of times real well with the recent discussion that you just had. So won't spend a lot of time on this tonight. You can see we're having a work session on this. I do want to remind the council, because of Senate Bill 1525, the way development impact fees are enacted is a little unusual compared to normal public hearings, for example. January 13th, you're going to have a public hearing, and that public hearing is going to be on the report that has been provided, which is referred to as Land Use Assumptions, Infrastructure Improvement Plan and Development Fees. And that night you will receive input from people that have an interest in the subject, and then you wait until February 24th before you actually make a decision on that. Very unique, because most of your public hearings that night, okay, here's what we're going to do. That's the way the statutes are written. I'll also tell you that a little bit because very unique, as Tracy is kind of the project manager working, or co-project manager with Joe Schmitz. Tracy and I are both going to be gone January 13th. Those were each separately scheduled events that each of us have that we had a lot longer than this, but the statutes are kind of dictating when we have it. Bob Beckley volunteered with excitement to represent staff that evening, and I appreciate that, Bob. And Bob is actually kind of a partner as we go through some of this discussion. Tonight we're talking primarily about infrastructure. After that, we do have fee calculations. They're actually not required at this stage of the process, but it helps us all get a frame of reference. Infrastructure by itself is kind of hard to understand. The dollars get hard to understand, but when you look at it in the context of fee calculations, and these are preliminary calculations, they will probably go down as we move forward.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Wally, go ahead.
Larry, for the public hearing,
Yes.
is the public going to come and contest or talk about this report, or is it just?
It is a public hearing that you will receive input on the information within the report.
From whom?
Tonight, generally I expect it to be from the development community. And that's
Okay.
one of the targets for this evening is we've had discussions with various members of the development community. You asked us to have that discussion,
Yes.
and we traditionally do have that discussion. We're going to report back some of the feedback that we've received in those discussions. We aren't necessarily going to resolve all of the issues this evening, but you're going to kind of get a sense of the ones that we're working on, how those are going, and we don't want you blindsided January 13th when you receive that information from them, because they have brought up some very good points in these discussions. They've been very valuable from a staff
wasn't
perspective.
this just kind of political background? The background on this is the home builders were more into all of these changes than the developers. And so that in itself has caused, I think, a lot of questions and apprehension on some of this. Is that correct? That's what, I mean, I've talked to both sides, and that's what it seems to have been.
And we have actually had conversations with various aspects. And as I look at development impact fees and who are the constituents that we talk to, we have talked to the Home Builders Association, who represent the people that build the houses and the infrastructure and the costs there. And yes, they were very much active in the legislation that was adopted.
Right.
The Multifamily Association also had participation. I believe I saw a gentleman from there this evening coming in. They definitely have an interest in the subject and were very involved in the legislation. Then there's another group that I'll refer to as a developer, and that is where they plan a community. They put in the infrastructure, or a lot of the infrastructure. They might sell out pads for a builder who would then put in the roads within that neighborhood, but it's part of a bigger infrastructure. A couple of examples of that that we would talk about would be Newland, Sunbelt Holdings, Macerich as it relates to the mall, and so forth. And then you've got also a level that we receive feedback from, and we'll go over, and that is what I'll call the landholders who are entitling the property that they have, but they might do some of the improvements, or they might sell the land with the plans, and others might do those improvements. So it's a tier of groups, and they have conflicting interests with each other, okay? Because one group might be putting the infrastructure in and expecting reimbursement. Another group might be the one that would be paying the fees. And so as we go through this discussion, it is important to understand that not everyone has the same interest in the outcome. But the conversations have been very logical, very friendly, and positive in the input.
Mayor, I got a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Joe?
Just for clarification, Larry, we got a book with all of the proposed capital improvement plan a while back. Is that the same book? I know you've had feedback since then, but is that the same book that's going to be presented at the January 13th meeting, or has it been revised?
This book is the book I think you're referring to.
Right.
And that has not been revised.
Okay.
Now, this evening, we're going to give you some things to think about.
Okay.
We've also, and on the schedule that we just went past, and I won't back up to it,
Right.
we have also penciled in very light pencil with an easy eraser a work session on, I believe it's January 27th, which is an opportunity if after the public hearing and the feedback you've received, plus some of the information that we've given you, if you want more information, that's a perfect time to do that. But it'll be February 24th when you would actually vote.
Okay, I got you.
We're also going to update you tonight a little bit on some internal discussions that we've been having, and that's part of where I get into the concept of, are they a liability or a source of revenue? And hopefully by the end of tonight, you're going to have a good idea of where we are in this whole process. We are going to provide you some options to think about. And some of those options, we want to put them as options as opposed to recommendations, so that we don't back you into a corner if we are, because of other discussions or thoughts, if we're heading a direction that would appear different than what you're looking at, we don't want to put a lot more effort into it. So with that having been said, here's kind of a list of who we've talked to or received comments from. They've been, as I've indicated previously, extremely productive. The development community meeting, compared to the impact fee study we did in 2008, 7, somewhere back in there, 2007, was considerably less attended. I think it was because in 2007, the proposal was, from their perspective, maybe coming way out from left field, but it was attended by what I would call key players. Mm-hmm. It was attended by the people that I've outlined previously, groups representing all of those groups, and they're the ones that really have the interest in it, and we really do appreciate the time that they've invested in working with us in this. So what issues were raised in these meetings? The first, and now I better get to my notes so that I don't miss some key points, because what I want to do in this is give you issues that are raised. Some of these may sound like they conflict with each other. That's okay. But we want to make sure that you're understanding what issues were raised and what they are. And please ask me about them if I'm not clear as I explain one. One of the things that we talked about, and I'm going to go back and forth between a couple of slides here, when we talk about areas not included in the study, as you'll recall, this is the areas in the study. The very top part is considered the north area. That's above I-10. The second area in there is the central area. That's basically I-10 down to the river. The third area is from the river to Pecos, and included within the third area is the Estrella development, as well as the areas outside of that development, but within those geographic boundaries. Then we get south of Pecos, both to Patterson and south of Patterson, and areas 4 and 5, we're not proposing any impact fees because we don't want the obligation of putting in infrastructure. Well, the conversation that we had and the concerns on the area of study was more about what was not included in the study. I think if you talk to development services, you talk to Sherry, there's a lot of dialogue going on in areas that are not included within that study. And we had a gentleman attending the community meeting that brought up specific questions on that. And what we explained was that at this point in time, there's no infrastructure to include in the study. And if we did include in the study, it would absolutely have to be built within a 10-year period of time, and it doesn't make sense. So as those projects evolve, this may be an issue coming back to the City Council to modify the impact fees to include those areas. But at this point in time, there's just not enough data to be able to do that. Also, we talk in here on service areas. And feedback that was received from some participants in there, specifically those that were more closely involved with the original legislation, might differ in interpretation than our consultant has talked about in certain fee category areas. As you recall in the discussion, those of you who were around when Senate Bill 1525 was adopted and were involved with it, a lot of the discussion on that time talked about the direct benefits that properties would receive with the impact fees going in. So the questions that came out from some of them then, from some of the participants in the meeting, were that we've got 3 fee categories, I believe. library, police, and fire are fee categories that we have kind of put them community-wide. So they're the same fees for all three areas, and the argument would be, should those fees be divided up? Library is a good example. We're going to build one library under this plan. Where will that library be? It could either be north of I-10 and probably more likely south of the river, given that we already have a library coming in right here where we're at today in the central city. Okay? But another example that I used in the discussion is our existing level of service would warrant 4 fire stations over the next 10 years. We knocked that down right in this proposal from 4 to 2 because of our concerns over our ability to fund the operations of those fire stations. Yeah. Those 2 fire stations would be south in Estrella, down in the southern part a little bit more there. At least in my head it's south. I have to admit, as I go through there, my directions don't necessarily completely fit. And then in the West Goodyear area where a lot of the residential is going. So the question is then, if you take a very proximity approach to it, should North Goodyear have any fire impact fees? Well, what's going to happen when we build the facility in West Goodyear is that will take pressure off of facilities in North Goodyear, which will allow a higher level of service in North Goodyear. And so that is the logic that we're using in putting this together. Rather than adding a fire station in North Goodyear, which would increase our total operating costs for everyone, we have to respond to these calls, and by proximity, by the stations and so forth. So that's some of the discussion that we had on that particular area, but there is a difference in opinion between some of the people and our consultant in that particular area.
What's the difference of opinion, the number or the argument?
The argument basically would be that the proximity should be closer to where the building is taking place, so that maybe north you wouldn't have an impact fee at all in fire, in my example, because you aren't putting a fire station there. Although I think they were using the library a little bit more as the specific example.
But isn't our fire all linked? So depending on who's the closest to the call, so it's one unit in itself. I understand what you're saying there, but isn't it one unit? When one's out, somebody else has to cover because of mutual aid and et cetera. So
which is exactly
even be
how
a Goodyear fire station.
Right, so
that would explain our interpretation of it. But tonight, part of what I want you aware of is what others are thinking.
Okay.
And as we've had these conversations, again, I want to point out that they haven't been hostile.
No.
They have not been threatening. But it's important that we have that dialogue with them.
Is it fair to say they're not always necessarily logical?
Well, actually, I can take their position.
Oh, I can.
So no, I wouldn't.
Not go that far, but
I
okay.
wouldn't. I really wouldn't. I can see the arguments. Haven't had this discussion with the city attorney's office at this point in time for reasons that we really want to ferret through a whole lot of information. Then we're going to sit down with the consultant and the city attorney. I'm talking on the specific follow-up, by the way.
Sure.
City attorney's office has been involved in a number of the development things that went into building the report, but not in the feedback.
See, I can appreciate the arguments that they're putting before, but if the fire station is vacated in the northern part of the city on a call, it's possible that station west will be used to cover that another call in that particular area. So again, I see them as all one linked unit, and it's a system that works off of each other. And to me, it's a value no matter where you add for the entire city. So.
The final comment that we had on area was we received from at least one particular developer was that we wanted to make sure, or they're concerned about competitive not one area having a competitive advantage over another area. So that was feedback that we received.
I can understand that.
Yeah, it makes sense, but we also have to look, again, at the context of the bill, of how it's written and how we put it all together. But it absolutely makes a lot of sense. So I know this looks like the same schedule again, but it's because we went through that map there to get here. The next area was cost recovery. And specifically on that, there's a couple of things that kind of hit on that subject. This is a significant change in how Goodyear does business and interacts with our development community. Significant change from how we have done things for 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay? One is that you go in and build infrastructure, and I'm talking maybe you build an arterial road, or you build significant infrastructure. In the past, you build that, runs by your property, but you build that arterial on the section line, and we would give you impact fee credits for that by agreement. Today, if it's not in this plan, you're not getting credit for it. So you might be paying the impact fee in addition. And the reason is that you kind of have to follow the plan. Now, the statutes allow a provision that you can replace infrastructure for like benefit infrastructure. But these are new statutes. How are they going to be interpreted when you get to court? Does that mean that the other one that you took out goes away? And as we have that discussion, just to give you a frame of reference from how we have done business in the past and how that impacts us today, with the changes in the statutes and what we have to do, and we've run through the calculations, these are preliminary estimates, and numbers may go down, and remember this is over a 10-year period of time, so no jumping off ledges when I throw some numbers out for you. But we've done an analysis of our existing development agreements and what has been, as a result of those development agreements, people have been given lower impact fees rates than what were built in there. And the city has to pick up that difference. And
What does that mean, Larry? Can you expand on that?
yeah, one residential area in Pebble Creek, for example, the total impact fee we collect there is like $550 per house.
Right.
Okay, so our total fee in that area might be, what is it, $7,500 in that area?
Oh, besides water and wastewater, yes.
About 12, yeah, 7,500 for round numbers. That delta, that's $7,000 per house, we have to pick up through the general fund in that particular case. Now, they provided infrastructure. Whatever caused the agreement at that time happened at that point in time. It's kind of a change in the statute. Well, our staff went through an analysis, and we just did it preliminary, so this is not the number. I don't want you to hang on to the number as much as the concept of it, because we're working it down as we move along with assumptions and that, but it was $32 million over the next 10 years of this infrastructure improvement plan that we would have to pick up. Okay? That's $3 million a year. So it's not as alarming. That's why I said don't focus on the number.
$3 million.
But
we have that.
But it's kind of a transition that we're going through. So we're receiving feedback from people that were used to the existing system that are saying, wait a minute, what you're telling me is if I have to put in or oversize this sewer line and it's not in your plan, that I'm not going to get reimbursed for it, but on top of that, I've got to pay the impact fees. So we're getting that on one side.
Well,
And on the other side, we're looking at that we have to pick up what doesn't. And keep in mind, this infrastructure that's in this plan, with the exception of water and sewer, you got 15 years water and sewer, you've got 10 years to complete the rest of what's in this plan. Okay? I'm telling you that just to give you a concept. I don't mean it to scare you, but as we look at our options and moving forward, It's something to think about. Do we want to do all of this infrastructure, or do we want to pare it down a little bit? And that's a dialogue we need to have.
Let me just ask you something real quick along those lines. If it's not in the plan, is it fair to assume it's not in the plan because they're going outside our normal boundaries where they want to develop? That's why we don't have it in the plan? That's not fair? Okay.
No. Initially, when we put this together, I was kind of, for example, on streets, I was kind of thinking, okay, well, our streets impact fee will go up from what it is today, but they're going to be putting in the streets, they'll get credits for it, and so forth. And I thought they'll work out. But no, and part of the reason I say no on this is that we have reduced down, and we'll show you a map in a little bit. Actually, let me go to it now. This schedule, this is just streets, okay? This schedule, if you look at the red lines are proposed street widening projects. You see a lot of focus around the I-10 expansion, the 303 as it's coming in, and so forth. And the green are traffic signals. Those items up there totaled, as I recall, approximately, about $45 million.
Wow.
That is a total of 21 projects on that list. The original list that we had 66 projects on it. So we already at that list pared it down. Now, subsequently to that, and
I'm sorry, because of 10 years? Because of
because
that,
of the 10 years,
Right.
because of the obligation. In other words, there's more infrastructure
Right.
we can show you. Didn't get in this book, but we're sure not trying to tell you that, boy, we do this and everything's good on streets for the next 10 years. Let's move on. We're not trying to say that with this. What we are trying to do with this is streets. The street impact fees, one is the calculated fees are considerably higher for the streets than for many of the other areas. And by the way, I'm only in this conversation doing North and Central. We'll get to down in Estrella, which has got there's another issue involving on streets, and I'll make sure I get to that, but only in these two areas. Then we carried it to the next step. Oh, yeah, commercial has a big impact on streets. And it carries a big dollar impact. So at the same time that you're trying to encourage job creation, retail growth, and so forth, a high street impact fee will have an adverse effect on it. And in fact, that's comments that we received. Now, I will tell you that the mall proper, we excluded from the calculation because they put a lot of that street infrastructure around when they built it. And so we exclude it. We can't add that infrastructure back in. That happened in 2007. If everything would have gone according to the plans, if the economy hadn't changed, the mall would have been built under that impact fee program. They would have received the credit for it, and that's how this has been calculated. But that doesn't necessarily cover all of the related commercial that will go with it. So as a staff, and this included, Bob took a lead role in this and his staff, but included engineering staff and development services staff. We reviewed this and said, okay, these numbers are probably on the high side. It's an area we have to look at. So what options would we propose, okay? And so this next slide, you'll see where the green lines have gotten, or the green dots have gotten faded. Those are the ones that we're proposing to remove. A couple of them we proposed to remove as we had some dialogue with engineering staff, and specifically the one on Indian School and Litchfield Road, and the two on McDowell on the eastern side, one on Litchfield and the other on Dysart, because from our engineering staff's perspective, they've already reached that demand factor. In other words, growth, future growth isn't causing it. We're already there. Others of these, for various reasons, were pulled out, some of which were just to try to manage the numbers on that and reduce that fee. So that was the logic behind it.
So what about the projects that were on our CIP plan? Or are they gone?
Good question.
Are
Good-
these?
No, that's a very good question. Thank
I
you,
mean,
because that
because I'm
creates.
worried about Indian School and
Yes.
going to 303 from Pebble Creek Parkway.
The Indian School from Saraval to 303 is still here. It's that red line that you see up there.
Yeah.
But a very good question on this. The IIP is a plan that is developed only for the impact fees. Our CIP, as the council has adopted it, and you adopted the latest version of it when you adopted the budget this year, only included items that were fully funded. We had not completed the impact fee study at that time, so we could not include all of those at that point in time. There is some money that is allocated, general fund money allocated to projects that are included within the IIP, but we can use that money to offset some of the difference that we talked about earlier. So that becomes a tool that we have to reduce that exposure that we have. But there has been no adjustments, proposed or otherwise, to the CIP that the city has adopted, or that you have adopted.
Joe, can you just look at me because there's other people. Joanne had a question first. Joanne?
No, I was just clarifying. You said that originally you went from 66 projects to 24 projects, and now you're showing this next bit where you've scaled it down even more?
That's correct. Down to 12 projects.
Down to 12 projects, okay.
Yeah. And this is still a work in progress with staff. Just this morning, we got some revised cost estimates from our engineer. Until we have a chance to vet those out, I don't even want to talk about those this evening, other than to let you know we're in the process of vetting a lot of this information to make sure that you have very good data for it. Also with this, if you want to see calculations of things moving forward, tonight we're not going to. I mean, I can give you cocktail napkin approaches on a few, but we can have our consultant run calculations and that kind of stuff. That may be of more interest to you after you've had the public hearing.
Joe?
Larry, it seems to me a concern will be some of the unintended consequences of the law. Example, the development agreement north of 10 called Pebble Creek. If we have police and fire development impact fees north of 10, then we got to make up that difference. If we don't have police and fire impact fees north of 10, what happens? Hold that thought there for a second. Then when it comes to the mall, all of that improvement on the road has already been put in, so they're going to pay their street, assuming there's a police and fire impact fee north of 10, okay? At that point, they would get no credits because we don't have anything new going in, I guess, unless they happen to put those roads in, because those roads are already in. And then we have the development agreement south of 10 with Estrella, which says if you put these water lines and these sewer lines in that may not be part of our CAP, they wouldn't get any credit for those either unless it happens to be listed. So I guess my question is, as this thing all gets worked out, I'm concerned about the unintended consequence, especially the general fund. We talked $32 million, in 10 years, but still, we're on a tight budget as it is anyway if we're throwing, $3 million a year at this stuff out of the general fund, on top of some of the other commitments we have going forward. So that's really a concern I have as I'm hearing these pieces and how some of this new law impacts, our ability to put this infrastructure in. Does that kind of make some sense here?
No, I understand completely, and I want to calm a few of those fears, but, and I'll start by apologizing for the complexity of this. I didn't create the statutes, but sometimes when I present things, I do tend to drill too deep. But I think you're asking a very good question, and we've given a lot of thought. I do want to, in the area of unintended consequences, because this one is interesting, you really hit on one that's interesting. And that is on the argument of should we, or, the fees, like we'll use the fire station example. Let's say we were to instead pull the fire fee from the north area. The actual math of that would be that the central area fee would go up higher, which is where most of the residential building is expected to take place in the next few years, and the general fund obligation would actually decrease. That's the math of it. I'm not advocating that change, and I want to make sure I explain why. I'm looking at this a little bit more long-term. We're setting policies as we're doing this, and I don't think we want to be in the business of trying to pick and choose a fee area. I'd much rather we're taking a position of how we're developing the fee structure and be consistent in that, so that not only now but 3 years from now, and that's my second point, I fully expect 3 years from now we're going to be doing this again. The statutes require it in 5 years. The only way we won't do it sooner is if our growth projections are dialed right on, and that just with everything happening, the volatility and growth, I really do expect in a couple, 3 years, we're going to be back moving again on this.
Go ahead, Joe.
But you could always add, if you decide to build another fire station north of, you could always add at that point in 3 years.
That is correct.
So it's not that the fact if you don't have one now doesn't mean you couldn't have one 3 years from now.
That is correct, and that's part of why I would rather we look at this more long-term. You can easily look at it short-term and say, oh, we could actually save general fund money by doing that, but in the long term, what happens when we decide 3 years from now, because of growth rates, that we do need a station up there or something else as we go through and modify. Let's try to keep it consistent. So that's exactly my point in all of this. It could, my 3 years could be optimistic on my part that it'll be that quick or that long it takes before we come back.
But on Estrella, I mean, how we've got so many development agreements down there as far as what they're supposed to put in.
Thank you. I forgot
How is that going to impact us as far as what credits they get? Because that whole deal was you put it in and you got your money back as the development came in.
Yes.
And that's how it was all being funded.
Actually, in certain respects, I'm glad, because I forgot to answer that part of what you raised, and I apologize for that. That one is actually quite interesting because the developer is putting in the infrastructure. And so the impact fees that we collect, particularly water, sewer, streets, are all reimbursed to the developer. None of it will end up with the city of Goodyear doing it. That by itself makes it easier in the short term. There are other issues that complicate this. You know, those issues get to be what happens when you want water and sewer outside of Estrella. The developer now has control of that system through the impact fees and so forth, but those are the cards we're dealt at this point in time. But that one, and that's why a lot of this discussion is on North and Central. It isn't at the expense of the South area, but the IIP in the South areas came from input from the developer. I will get to their comments here as I move on, but you know, they will be the ones putting in the infrastructure, and they will be the ones being reimbursed. Our risk in that South area is that they underperform, they don't put the improvements in, and under the statutes, we may have some obligation to put that infrastructure in. That would be our risk.
Can we still give them back it almost seems to me that if that's not, I understand you, if it's not in the plan, we can't give them back the impact fees. Can they still get the impact fees as a result of putting that in?
Because we put those in this document, those obligations that we owe them for have been shown as debt in these obligations, which were allowed in the statutes. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay.
I just want to make sure we're not out holding the bag. Okay.
Yeah.
Joanne?
Well, this obviously is very complex, and I'm trying to decide whether or not, I mean, it's looking like, as you said, the unintended consequences of all of this may be felt on the development community themselves that they're not realizing. I also am starting to feel like it may hinder some growth also for the future, but I'm not really sure just because of the complexity of,
I think it's going to.
because we're going to be
No
it's
question.
putting the pressure on the city to say no to something because a situation is not being taken care of. That's what I'm, so correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I'm gathering from some of this discussion.
If I could, as we move forward, we've got some comparisons of where we are in fee amounts to other people that are going through this process. And let's have that discussion at that time when we get there, and make sure I get there,
okay.
because that's very fair
As
dialogue
it actually
also.
stopping growth from paying for itself? Are we going to find ourselves in this situation in the future? And when I say future, obviously it's going to be 5 to 10 years, that we're going to say, you know what, residents of Goodyear, we are stuck as a city, and we're going to have to raise your property tax because growth did not pay for itself in the last 10 years. So, I mean, that's obviously a future situation, but this is just what I'm
No, that's
wondering.
a very real one. I will give you an example of when you use the terminology growth paying for itself, that won't apply. Items that are excluded from the impact fees, you're not collecting impact fees.
Right.
We have, as we are growing, and we're seeing it today, and you're hearing about it today, needs for police administrative facilities in addition to specific services. There are no police administrative facilities in these fees because they're not allowed by statute. So that's an example where that doesn't fit into the puzzle because of the statutes. Nothing any of us can do about it. We've got to figure out other ways that we're going to solve those issues.
So what's interesting
Wow, there was a lot
to
of
me-
thinking going
What's
on
interesting to me is that I'd like to
Lack
see a
of-
map that shows the cities that this is really causing a great deal of angst.
Actually, cities, as we get there, and maybe we'll come back to
Because
this
I'm
chart.
looking at the other part of the valley, which is pretty well developed out. So hey, we've got it. We've got what Arizona needs. We really don't need all this development out there. So, I mean, I'm getting some other feelings from this. It's too bad that I feel this way, but I do.
Well, it's changing. I think the way to look at it is more as an opportunity, that it's changing how we fund growth.
That's a sales tool. I'm telling you, I'm a salesperson, and when I want, and I tell people when it's a
an
negative, I say, no, this is an opportunity. So I really
Good
I
try,
have
Larry.
to tell you, Larry, no offense on you, but
Don't use that word.
these opportunities they're giving us is
killing you.
out
They're
of
giving us a
somebody's
heartburn.
pocket, and so.
No, I understand completely. This chart relates to both your comments and Joanne's comments a little bit ago. What this is our staff went to websites and pulled off comparable fees from other cities throughout Arizona that are in the same process. And because of the timing of the statutes, all of us are in the same process, okay? Now, what this tells you is the fees that are included in their report at that point in time. This does not tell you what they will adopt. But we're third highest on this list of all of these cities. Okay? Scottsdale's fairly low, but they really only have water and sewer within
What do
their
they have?
fees.
See, tell us as you go through this, because I'm looking at this saying, Scottsdale is really built out. So, okay, what do they got?
Right.
Some water issues? So go through it, because that's really where the crux of it is.
Absolutely is. And quite frankly,
Aren't
we aren't going
surprises
to
in on there?
know.
Shoot.
Their information wasn't available.
Oh, really? Okay.
We got this from websites, so we didn't have the information. We got the cities that we could. We also, for example, you'll notice in Goodyear, we did the central city. We didn't want to complicate it by saying each area within. And likewise with each of these other cities, it was done the same way, of taking one, but we tried to make it more competitive. For example, water and sewer, areas that other communities that might have water in some areas and not in others. We included the areas that had water and sewer because that's a fairly significant fee within there. And so what you see as you're going through there, you've got Chandler that is, that's a lot closer to build out. They've gone through their growth phases. Gilbert's growing, but has been for quite some time.
Natural lake or something?
Avondale, Peoria, Buckeye, we're kind of familiar with them as our neighbors of where they are in the growth curve. I think Buckeye would be a little closer to us as far as percentage build out, whereas most of the other communities that are on this list are much higher percentage build out than we are.
We're surprised, Larry.
We don't know.
They didn't have their fees.
It wasn't posted on the website. At least we couldn't find it on the website, so we just don't know.
I thought, so Queen Creek is more built out? I didn't realize that.
Oh, no, I'm not suggesting they are.
I'm laughing at the water at zero, thinking they have some hidden lake that's natural there.
I don't think they provide water service. I think it's a private water company.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, so, yeah, so that's their...
Lucky them, you know.
That's their trick. To do that. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a frame of reference as we're looking at this and going through it. But I think also that kind of outlines some of the areas of concern that we've been looking at as a staff of, you know, is the fee as proposed at the right level? Do we need to move it? And there is some low-hanging fruit, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to make sure I got through on the oversizing area. The concern was if someone puts in pipe, let's say sewer, it's going to benefit other people. Are they going to get recovered for that? We're looking at to see if there's any oversizing included in this financing plan to cover it. At this point, I'm not sure that there is, but it's a fair comment that came from some people. The streets we've talked about, I jumped the gun a little bit on that. Traffic signals. Here I want to talk about one of the concerns that was expressed, so I want you aware of it. Down in the south area, in the Estrella area, they proposed 3 traffic signals, and there's only one that we've left in the plan at this point, and they have concerns about that. In the other areas of the city, the traffic signals are all arterial to arterial connections. And in Australia, the 2 that were thrown out are more collector to arterial, and our consultant is concerned about consistency. Before the public hearings, and definitely before you would make any decision, want to have another discussion with them. Our old system on traffic signals and the impact fees were that we would put in that we will do 2 or 3 traffic signals a year without stating where they will be. And so there, as a developer, they wanted to make sure that they weren't just paying the fee and not getting their proportionate share, so they would put in for those traffic signals. I'm not sure that they understand that that would be part of the fee for the south area, and that's the only part that'll be included, and that it's really, I'm just not sure they completely understand it. And we'll have a follow-up dialogue with them, but I wanted you aware of that.
Bill?
I'm almost hesitant to ask my question, but Larry, is that if the developer wanted to add more traffic lights because they felt it was important for their community, is that something that they can do as an, I'm going to use the word assessment, is that the correct word for a CFD?
Well, it's up to them.
That's a good question, and it would depend on the location and the specific.
I mean, if it was in their little CFD area, can they?
Most of the CFD assessment improvements, which is the ones they've been talking about, most of those are actually, I'm going to call neighborhoods. So they wouldn't generally have a traffic signal as part of it. They're going to be those neighborhoods where they feed into the collector.
Sure.
But then the collector is the one that feeds into the arterial. So in those cases, that would not be eligible. That type of improvement, if it is within the boundaries of an assessment area, would be eligible to be financed. But it's given the whole timing of things, I don't think these lights would be able to get reimbursed that way.
But it is an option for a developer to try to fund it in another means outside of their own checkbook.
Yeah, it can be an option, but it also, as developers, they incur a lot of costs, and I don't think these costs as a percentage are as big as many of the others that they are incurring that they don't get reimbursed for.
Sure. Okay. Thanks.
Wally?
My question, Larry, is all of our development agreements that are now on the books, they're all grandfathered in, right? Because we're reimbursing some of them for certain infrastructure.
That is correct.
So those are not even any of these of the 12 lucky projects that are going to be funded.
That is correct.
Okay.
We will not receive the impact fees from those that have already received credits, but we'll still have to do that. And so the math of it is that we'll have to pick up that cost that's included in these calculations. And that was that large number that I threw out earlier of the addition of all of those.
Okay, and you keep referring to the possibility of perhaps not having an impact fee for police and fire in the north area. Is that a decision this council is going to make? Or was that just in passing? Or did I misunderstand?
No, I will clarify to make sure. That was feedback that we received from some members of the development community.
That they want to
They felt that our interpretation, excuse me.
Go ahead.
They felt that our interpretation was different than what theirs was of the statutes. Not all members of the development agreement of the development community did agree with that.
Okay, because in Pebble Creek we're still going to build 2,000 or 3,000 more homes, and that's a lot of impact fees.
Yes.
And
that was part of that calculation.
Yeah, I don't want to give it away.
Unfortunately, it's already. Unfortunately,
given away?
that train has left the station.
Oh darn.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was part of that large number that I threw out.
Oh.
Okay.
Shucks. Okay.
Trails. Comment we received on trails.
Yes.
This project is near and dear to, I think, everyone's heart. It's been, a high priority of our citizens. Comment received on the trails was that basically the people involved, again, with the ordinances didn't feel that trails were an eligible project to include in development impact fees.
So in other words, the home builders.
And with that, they felt that the statutes were very specific on what could be included. Our consultant interprets the statutes differently than them. Our consultant interprets the statutes to say that it also doesn't mention specific inclusions within a park, which trails are part of the park system. And so ramadas aren't included in there, but they're a natural part of any park. And so that's where there's a difference of opinion. There are some issues that we have with the trails, and as we talk about options down the road, I'll bring up some of the other issues with that. Understand, again, impact fees are one source of funding things. They are not the end that will fund everything. Mayor.
Oh, yes, Sherry?
Thank you.
And Larry, I guess with the theme with a lot of this is if the builder or the developer still wants to put in those trails, they can still do that, right? It just doesn't go through the impact fee process.
Correct. Also, for clarification on the trails, when we included our what level of service are we providing today? The only level of service we could include are those trails that are for the public use. For example, I live in Canyon Trails. We've got a great trail system every day. As we're going through the study, I talked about that. I walk it every day and all this kind of stuff. And then one day after we'd gone through it a little bit, as I was walking out, I noticed a sign there that says residents only. Now, I've never seen anyone enforce it, but the bottom line is that those trails are for the Canyon Trails residents. They're not built as community trails per se. Does that mean it gets enforced that way? No. Does that mean it could be? Yes. And
so we have to make sure that
we
they
didn't include that as part of it, nor would they have gotten trail impact fee credits. Even if we do include it in there, you wouldn't get it for that trail system. That is correct.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Joe?
contingency.
You were mentioning impact fees just one source of funding. Hypothetically, if there are no fire impact fees north of 10, and down the road, some developer west of north of 10 puts a development in which demands a fire station, are we still able to negotiate them putting one in as part of a development agreement, or is that precluded as a result of the new statutes?
That's a good question, Joe.
I don't think that there's any restrictions on what gets agreed upon in a development agreement. As to the likelihood of them agreeing to it, that could be the second half of that question that I couldn't answer.
See, my concern is, again, what Wally had mentioned earlier, is I know you just threw out a number, but that's a lot of things we can build with a general fund subsidizing whatever that number happens to be to make up that shortfall, that development agreement.
Right.
And that's why my concern has always been, and I mentioned it before when we were looking at some of those, and I realize a lot of those development agreements are old on those west properties, but that's what happens when we go out as opposed to infill, because when we do that, that demand and this, and here the, what do you call it, the chickens are coming home to roost as a result of the new statute, which now creates some issues for us, or like I call the unintended consequences on how we adopt this and what our general fund may or may not have to pick up. And that kind of concerns me when it comes to those points.
I think you actually hit upon a part that, like, we'll look at the streets as an example. I'm sorry, no, I'll get back there. If you look at the streets, even the original plan, a lot of the discussion that we had on that are streets that are transportation to move people around the entire community as a result of growth, not streets that are necessary for you to build where you're going to build. And that's where you're getting back to the concept of infill. And you hit upon that, and I think that was kind of the intent as the IIP was developed, was to focus more on the growth impact on the entire community as opposed to a particular spot right next to it. Now, that's not always consistent, as I've indicated previously. That's not always consistent with what some of the development community arguments might be. I'd like to go very quickly into the final comments on shopping, and then we'll move into some options. And we've given a lot of thought to some options for your consideration. And there were two comments that came up, and these are contradictory comments in the shopping area. One comment that we received was that, if you recall, when we had Sherry had the people from the retail consultants here a few, I don't know, 2 months ago, and they made some comments in there, and they talked about changing retail store sizes are changing and so forth. They made that comment. Gentleman from the Home Builders Association was at that meeting also, and that registered with him because a lot of the commercial rates are built on traffic counts per square foot. And he's saying if the square footage is shrinking but the same traffic is in there, the traffic counts should increase per square foot. At this point in time, I mean, all of these are built on traffic analysis, impact statements. We're using the same standards that are used throughout the country, but I wanted you aware of those comments. The other one is, and this came from the commercial side, that under this book, the non-utility impact fee would be going from $1.76 per square foot to $4.14 per square foot, a fairly significant change in that. And I just wanted you aware of those comments as we move forward in this discussion.
Joe?
Why such a large increase?
Because the street impact fee has the largest impact on commercial, if you will, other than water and sewer, which is based on water meter size. But street is based on trip generation.
That's right.
And a mall will generate a lot more trips than my house will.
Depends on what's going on.
Well, if those trails are
Appreciate you not going there.
Yeah, well, you got the trails kind of going through there.
yeah,
So
see
you,
the trails.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, it's the math of it. And it's the
I
street
understand.
that causes it.
And are
And
we
that
keeping
does
track
remind
of
me,
county?
just a second here, did we put anything in here, or should I bring up now the comment about parks and library, that they should be commercial and that? I don't think we put that in, did we? One other comment that and I just wanted to verify, that we received is that traditionally, throughout the country, again, not unique to Arizona, park and library impact fees are only imposed upon residential. And the comment that we received is those impacts are often coming from commercial and business where someone might go to lunch and that type of thing. Our consultant who does these around the country looks at that and said that that's more of a de minimis use of those facilities and doesn't agree with them. But I wanted to make sure that we got that out on the table, that you were aware of it. And so reductions or possible eliminations of improvements that we've looked at. And I want to start with the bottom half of this chart, which is consider future operating costs. The impact fee study, and I think when we presented this to you, I think we told you that, but this shows that we would add 2 parks, and both would be in the central area, one in the north part of the central area and one in the south part of the central area, over the next 10 years. Quite frankly, given that we have 2 major parks at this point, even though we could rationalize that operating it doesn't make sense. Adding the second part doesn't make sense. So while it's in the study, we believe that that's one that is very easy to remove from the study. It knocks $1,200 for round numbers right off the fee. And really, you've got to link it to your cost of operations. Library is the second one I want to mention in that context. And when it was put in the study, it was put in based upon existing level of service, with the existing level of service being the library that is being just completed right here in this complex. And that's 10,000 square feet, slightly under 10,000 square feet. The level of service would warrant us to build another library, and impact fees would pay for 59% of it in the next 10 years. Right now, today, while we own the library and the materials, we do not run the library. That's an operating cost that we will be absorbing as we move forward. To plan in the same 10-year period of time to add a second library when we really haven't absorbed the operations from the first, we're not necessarily convinced that that makes a lot of sense. Third one on future operating costs, and I have to speak a little quietly because there's a certain person with a gun behind me, but in the police department, the calculation based on existing level of services, we could provide about 71 vehicles out of impact fees over the next 10 years. Most of those vehicles, not all, but most of those vehicles would go for officers. And they have to be new officers. So we would be committing to adding somewhere, let's say, towards 71 new police officers over the next 10 years. Not there, okay?
Oh, no.
I'm sorry.
Sherry? Come on, get a little lawyer talking.
I'm sorry, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard coming from our legislator who wrote that. So if we have officers, we can buy 71 vehicles, but we have to have 71 new officers.
Okay, that's kind of me working. Let me explain this clearer. Okay, right now we have a take-home policy for the vehicles. So as a patrolman, they take the car. That makes the car last longer. Okay, and that's not uncommon. The calculation of the existing level of service, added up all of those vehicles and all of those things that we own today, and said, with growth at the same rate of service, you can add this many vehicles, okay? But now we get into implementing it. And so it's really me. It's not the legislation. This is more me saying, okay, if we wanted to go in and commit today that many police officers over the next 10 years, that's a fairly significant general fund commitment that we think we need to take a look at, and that is something that we need to reduce. So that isn't as legislative as it is us just stepping back and looking at.
No, I think you're interpreting it for conservatively for the city. I appreciate that, but it just seems like how this is written, all of this is written is just.
No matter how you package it.
It's not you, Larry. You're
No,
doing a
I'm-
great job trying to work around what you can.
Yeah. I'm not taking any of the comments personally on any of this.
Joe?
I mean, we can put them in a car, but we can't put them in a building. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
How about a couple trailers?
Well, the trailer, the trailers could have wheels.
I'm
Remember,
sorry.
he's got the gun, not me.
He's saying I want 71 new police
Yeah, I hear
officers.
you.
He didn't have a
I hear
problem
you.
with it.
Now, we have had this conversation.
Or tents.
And,
We'll figure out
no,
something.
the chief understands exactly. When we put it in that context, he said, oh, that's a big number.
Tired.
So that's not a new conversation.
But,
Trails.
but you're not, it's not settled, right? I mean,
What
that,
we're suggesting in this, I don't want to use the term recommendation, but I probably should in this case. We're recommending we drop that number down to a more palatable number where we can project future growth and needs for the officers, future ability to pay for those officers from the operating side. Buying the car is the easy part, and it's really not a big part of the fee. The hard part is
paying their salary.
Operating.
equipping that car
It
with,
is, yeah.
with a live body and out there doing
Right.
the job. That's the expensive part. Oh, it's getting late, and
Yeah,
I've
we're
dragged on
getting
too
wrong.
late now.
Okay.
Trails. Told you I'd follow up on this one a little bit. The trails number that's included in this study basically is for unpaved trails. And primarily it's intended to extend down Bullard Wash. One cost that wasn't included in that calculation, appropriately by the way, is the cost of channelization within that drainage area, within the Bullard Wash. The total trail part of this, and given the comments talked about earlier where some people don't feel that that's authorized by the statutes, and we have not reviewed this with legal counsel yet, who could, after he looks at it, could have an opinion that would advise against it, but I don't know. I don't want to go there. Let's just assume we're okay doing it. Even there, the total fee on that's $160 a house. And you're generating over a 10-year period of time, I believe it's about $2 million, wasn't it?
1.7.
Yeah, $1.7 million. And I'm not sure, for the commitment of what we'd be doing, that we should be putting the trail impact fee in.
Now, is that the trail from I-10 South?
That would be basically as far as we could get it for $1.7 million. But yes, it would basically be going I-10 south.
Because we've got it
Correct.
behind.
We've got it
Estrella
behind the
Falls.
mall, and then it would,
Right, yeah.
but it would be coming south. It might be south. From McDowell? 10
10
south?
south, yeah.
Okay, that's right, yeah.
So from the 10 to, say, the base of the mountain, of Stray Mountain,
Well, maybe the river.
wherever
the
it
river.
would go, okay, to the river, whatever.
Yeah.
Do we have a cost estimate of that full project?
I don't know.
The number we heard was $5 million per lineal mile,
Oh, my goodness.
just for the channelization.
Oh, my.
Now, that's just a number I heard in a meeting, and we didn't vet that number very much. But that's part of why, as a staff, we're looking at, we can come back in 3 years and cross that bridge with hopefully better information than what we have right now. And so I would give serious consideration to just eliminating the trails today and not precluding yourself from moving forward on that. If there is litigation on the
You see,
subject.
now we got police stations, and now we're gonna do,
Yep.
eliminate police stations and trails, and, okay.
Fitness of our people, the safety of our people. Oh.
Right. Top priorities. Yeah. But this is the growth funding portion of it. The streets we already talked about. The library I talked about,
Yeah.
and then police I've talked about.
Good night.
That's the streets,
So
gone through there.
This is just
So depressing. Goodness.
love you, Larry. Love you.
Sorry,
But you'll never invite me back, I get it.
and you're going to be gone the 13th, huh?
Well, the good news is, the public hearing itself is for you to receive input and nothing more.
Oh, good.
What I'd
do
like,
not have to
though,
make
is,
decisions
is
that
our
night.
public going to know enough to come in? Public, let's put anybody outside of the building industry. Will they know enough to come up and make remarks? Are we going to educate them somehow? Do they know the impact on the city?
I don't think
That's the question I have. How are we going to get that out before that hearing? Because I'm going to tell you, no, there won't. Then they'll say, well, look, your public accepted this, because your public didn't understand it. Because it's very difficult for 7 people here to understand it.
crazy.
And I think it's difficult for 511 people, it's our staff, to understand this. They have made this so complicated, and I'm going to say as a mayor, and this time I don't care. They did not think about the West Valley and about where all the land was and where the development was going. I think the legislature looked at those places that are, man, they've got their restaurants and their entertainment, and they don't need any more tracks, and they don't need any more buses, and they don't even. And here we are. That decision could not have been made thinking about the entire Maricopa County.
That's right.
Not at all. Excuse me, now I just had to say
Or
that.
the state in general, for that matter, really.
Bill?
Mayor, on that note, I am actually quite curious, so I'm going to look to our city manager and say, can we get at perhaps the next regular council meeting in the communications part? I mean, it doesn't have to be anything big. Who or how our West Valley legislators voted on this?
Oh, they all voted
They
for
all
it.
voted for it.
Are we sure they all did?
Yep. Well,
Well, that's what I'm saying. I want to push this off. I'm not making any assumptions tonight, but I would really be curious to know by name who voted to put this into place for us, because I think that's important information, not only for us, but also for the public to hear.
Sure, we can put that together.
But before, what we really need to do is there any way, because this is so complicated, and I don't mean to push this all on you, Larry, that there would be some kind of constructive outline that would actually give the people an idea of what each of the, because this is kind of convoluted, even when you're trying to explain it to us, you lose it here and there. But there has to be a way that we could articulate to them, okay, this is what it means to your community. We are not building any more trails after this point. We cannot put so many police stations up or fire station. I mean, these are very simple things. We're going to grow the population because these builders are going to go out and build, and we're going to be left with really not being able to take care of our community and give them good public service. So there has to be certain things without being dramatic and without adding something that's not true, but just saying these are definitely proven consequences of these acts. That I don't understand why we can't have. I right here, I could make 10 lists that I think. So that's what I'm asking, because it's not fair to the public. They're pulling the wool over the public's eyes because they have made this so difficult that your normal person buying a house will not be able to comprehend that. And so they're going to sell a house to people that are not going to get the service in their cities in the West Valley. That's what it looks like to me.
And the question
Am I
is,
alone in
who's
this
going to
feeling?
pay for it? No.
That's right. There won't be services in cities any longer. But by golly, there will be people making money right? It won't be, okay, without being nasty. So anyway, is there a possibility of doing that?
There definitely. We will, we'll have to get to a point between the public hearings. There'll be 2 public hearings. And I think it'll become clear after more information is shared with you as far as what our impact, the list of projects will look like. And then from that, we can do a discussion over what the value or what the effects of this program will be, the impact fees in the short term, both in the short term and the long term. So to kind of get to, I think, the points that you look for, how will services be impacted? How will facilities be impacted? How will the traffic congestion will rise potentially in the time? So
I don't want to be unfair to the development community, the builders. I don't want to be that. But basically, I'd like to see you guys draw a house. Okay, so now what services will that house will? I'm sorry, but there won't be a fire station anywhere near you. So maybe you better figure out some of your own, something you can do by yourself to get your fire out. I mean, those are the basic things that you need to, you know, this is what you're not going to have. Buy the house, they're building a beautiful house, but
No park?
you will have,
No,
yes,
yeah,
right, you
no.
will have no amenities.
And no library. But see, now when it comes, now my question though, about that house being built, and say the fire station, this is where I'm getting a little lost on. Why can we not, as a council, say, no, this, you know, this is out of our range of safe, a safe, controlled environment, so we are going to say no to this plat, unless you come up, Mr. Developer, with your own money to pay for that fire station. That's where I'm getting, I mean, we're sitting there saying, so what is it? That's where I'm getting a little lost on. So we can just flat out, so that's how that's the unintended consequences, it's just stopping growth. Because we're going to have to say, sorry guys, you know, you're out of, you're in a 20-minute, you know, type of situation, response time, or whatever it may be. That's where do we have the teeth?
That is absolutely your prerogative as the legislative body, but it's more appropriately handled at the time of zoning. So when you're considering a zoning action, you should consider your ability to serve the property. And if the city's not ready to serve the property, then that's certainly a reason not to approve the zoning. So that's
So it's putting it back on our shoulders of
not approving it.
right.
Mayor.
Joe?
The problem is, and correct me if I'm wrong, City Attorney, is that we have all of these already platted lots out there
Millions of
that
them.
already have the ability to build.
That's accurate, yes.
Now, if there's new coming before us that's outside, that gives us some credence there. But there's thousands of them out there that already been platted.
But can final plat, but that doesn't, have they been through final plat?
A lot of them have.
Many have. Again, you can run some of that decisions at the time of plat, but a lot of that is really more appropriate at the time of zoning.
Bill?
And on that note, I know we have got these checklists of things that we always answer the question, how far away is it, how blah, blah, blah. Can we make sure that that ability to serve question is on the zoning checklist, if you will, that everyone is looking at before we get a zoning request? So we don't say, oh, geez, we completely forgot about it. Because I think we rely pretty heavily on a lot of those checklists. So adding that to it, I think, will help this discussion in the future.
I think I would like to link, because we've talked about fire a lot just in this dialogue.
Joe has.
I want to go back to fire a little bit and how many stations we can operate. And there's got to be some linkage, I think, with all of this to infill, because quite frankly, with the growth projections to operate 4 more fire stations in the next 10 years, even if proximity warrants it, we may not have the funds to operate it, and that's where our concern is. So I just want to make sure that that's understood as part. That isn't the impact fee statutes that's limiting that. That's our ability to operate them. Now, 3 years from now, we might be looking, and one of those might be built or in the plans or something, and as we're revising it, we might look at that time, growth assumptions have changed, and those 2 could become that 4 at that point in time.
But then you wouldn't need it if you don't let them build, so. Okay.
But,
Joe?
but it's my understanding impact fees are impacting it because of our agreement in the Pebble Creek area. Because if we go ahead and we put one of those fire stations, or we put the fee eligible for north of 10, then the general fund's going to have to make up that difference. So the new impact, the new law is impacting our ability to build stations, because if for some reason that we've got to drain $3 million or whatever it is off a year on average, that's going to create a problem for us out of our general fund. So there is an indirect, that's what I mean, unintended consequences. There are some consequences as a result of this statute. For us.
Where are we in the, how much further are we?
I've already gone over this.
Okay.
So we're kind of ready to wrap it up unless there are other questions.
One more question.
Joanne?
So as we look at this so-called 3 million, have you put that into the next year's budget, or is that not till 2015 budget that we're thinking? How does this go into play?
That's a good question. First of all, if everything moves forward, even as proposed, they don't take effect till August 1st of 2014, and that infrastructure would be developed in that 10-year period that would begin on that date. We will be refining that analysis between now and definitely before you would have to vote on anything. We will have that analysis much more refined. It's just kind of, it was a preliminary. It's been reduced once, but we got to tie it back to development agreements and what they have available to make sure they have the number of lots available to them that aren't there yet. So there's more work to be done on a number of these issues, is what I'm saying.
But will it be in this coming budget?
It would start in this budget. You would want to have those set-asides, just because you wouldn't want to defer that liability to have it come up all at once.
That's
You'd
fine.
want to kind of set it aside.
I
yes.
understand.
And hopefully the number will go down.
Any other questions for Larry? Larry, thank you. I'm sorry
Thank you
for
very
all
much.
the reaction you got from the council.
That's what we're
Probably
here for.
should be somebody else around the table getting that, but unfortunately you were the receiver of that tonight.
But thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
All right, council, I don't believe there's anything that came from the manager's office to be talking about tonight. All right, so the next meeting will be January 6th, 5 p.m. will be a work session, and the next regular meeting will be on the 13th. We just want to wish everybody happy holidays, a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, happy whatever, okay? And we'll see you next year.
Thank you.